Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be episode 257 of our regular shows, and we're recording this one on March 4th, 2023. This is the official podcast for the fan site, AvatarTheLastAirbenderOnline.com, and I'm going to be your main host, Morgan Airspeed Prime. Joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So, on today's show, we have a bunch of news to talk about from the last few weeks, though we will get through it fairly quickly. There's probably only one or two kind of like in-depth news topics, and then afterwards we'll be continuing our reviews for both Avatar and Korra with 201 The Avatar State for Avatar and K202 The Southern Lights for Korra. So 2 episodes this time out. So we'll jump straight into the news. So the thing that happened, I think, immediately following the last podcast was that Avatar Generations, the mobile game, actually released everywhere, worldwide. There was a little bit of surprise about just, I suppose, how quickly it came out, because we were wondering for a while. We knew the launch was coming at some point, but maybe it was a bit sooner than expected. But since then, obviously, it's been out for just about a month at this point. And interestingly, only a few days ago, they actually did their first, I suppose, proper content update for the game that wasn't just new summon banners or kind of challenge events. And they actually added Omashu into the game, as well as a new boss battle and kind of stuff like that. So people have had a chance to check it out now, and it's an interesting one for sure. I think the kind of general perception has been somewhat mixed, but I think a lot of fans are enjoying it, but it's not like perfect. It hasn't been like an incredible launch, and we can get into some of why that is. I've obviously been playing it quite a bit. I've been making sure to log in every day, sometimes playing for like a decent amount of time, other times just doing the kind of bare minimum that I need, and I've been making okay progress, but definitely have been wanting kind of more content to be in the game for quite a while now. But Greg, what about you? What's your experience with Avatar Generations so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been, fun to play around with it. I definitely haven't been in it every day as much as you have. But, I've played, a couple missions. I've gotten this feel of how it works and all of the different, systems it has, which is quite a bit to, I guess, sort of the experience firsthand how the different systems actually work with each other and, where you can upgrade and where if you wanted to pay for money, you could pay for money. But, the overall idea of it, and I think is, it's fun enough for what they're going for. I definitely can sort of understand the idea of people having sort of mixed receptions on it, which I think, regardless, unless it was a really, really sort of stellar mobile game, ones that sort of are just uber popular, is probably always going to have that sort of reception regardless. It just happens to, be for a particular popular IP, so we're sort of keen on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like for me, the best part of this, I think, is that for this type of game, I actually think there is quite a bit of depth to the battle system, in that I think the characters are actually designed to be pretty unique, and there's quite a lot of text buffs, debuffs in each skill that the characters have. So even though they only have sort of 2 attacks and then a basic sort of skill that's just always active, I think there's quite a lot going on here with the kind of general mechanics of the game, in that there's for Bender characters, there's the elemental debuffs, but then the non-Bender characters have their own debuff. But then other characters can do other things, there's freeze, there's knockdown on a lot of Earthbender characters. There's focusing on critical hits if you want to do that. There's the kind of lifesteal effect as well. And then you can augment that with your character has an item called a relic, which also gives sort of basically another ability. You get more stats from your kind of animal pet. And then the arts, which are these kind of group of 6 items, which are pretty much just there for stats. There's quite a lot of kind of build crafting you can do there, in that if you upgrade all those arts, you can completely change the stat lineup of a character and do some pretty crazy things if you go all in on one specific thing, and that's sort of like almost the key to getting past some of the harder missions. So that side of things is, I think, really really good. But what was your takeaway on the kind of RPG kind of battle system that we have here?
Yeah, I mean, I think I like the battle system. I mean, I think, of course it could be more involved, but I think, for what they're trying to go for here, it is, like you say, it is, quite a bit to it, more than you might particularly think they would have offhand. And I don't know, that almost might make it sort of like overly complicated for some who just want to sort of just like get into it and just sort of more the sort of, battle side of things versus really diving deep into sort of the RPG-ness of it. So I think, it can go both ways in terms of what you're really into or what you're looking for in a mobile game. So they definitely went more along the lines of, having more different combinations of things where you can, like you said, you really can change your stats. And sometimes it seems like that's kind of like essential, which, can sort of be a gotcha if you really sort of are trying to get past a certain point. I know that happened to me for a little bit. But, if you have, some patience and you don't need to like really, 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 like go through everything at like breakneck speeds, then I think, for a more casual type of person or type of play, it holds your attention enough for that. And, if you like the story and stuff or the new stories that they're sort of making or extra side things, then, it kind of works in that regard. But yeah, I think it really just depends on your sort of flavor game that they want to go for, which I guess considering, Avatar is always about sort of the story and the lore and the world building and stuff like that. It kind of makes sense that they went this route. I don't know if that's sort of like the best way that everyone would have wanted to see it on mobile per se, but that's the route they chose to go for.
Hmm. Yeah, like it is an interesting point that like you are almost like required to interact with the kind of upgrade systems quite heavily, because I noticed a few people just commenting on like my videos saying that like, how do I get past this fight? Even some very early ones, like you have a solo fight, Katara versus the Unagi, which seems to be a struggle point for a lot of people. And the only real advice that you have is like, obviously level the character up as much as possible, ascend them if you can, and then Katara is a defense character, so put defense arts. Even if you can't upgrade them much, that will just help you. That's just one of those kind of stay in the fight and you'll eventually kind of get through it type things. Similarly, like there's a really rough difficulty spike like towards the end of the like content that was initially in the game at launch in Shen Guan, where you face like a 3-round fight against a team of like all earthbenders, and if you go in like completely unprepared, you will get blown away, because suddenly this is like one of the first times you really see the enemies stacking up the like elemental debuffs, and the earth one on the higher levels skips your turns. So if you have no resistance, you just don't get to go. So you have to like put some arts in there that have the resistance stat on them to kind of make progress there. And once you do, then it's a much more okay fight. Once you're not getting like crazy stacks of the debuff, it's fine. And then you start to experiment with like, oh, what if I start doing some crazy debuff stuff, like the air debuff like slows the opponents down and gets you more turns, and it's pretty cool in that way. The other, I suppose, big point for me is that I think you can tell the developers like Avatar, know Avatar. There are some nice references in like the item descriptions, like what the relics are. Like there's Yang Chen in there. There's Tianhai references, Ursa masks. Tagaka gets referenced on one of the relics. There's a lot of stuff like that. Even just the little details where they start mentioning stuff like alluding to Fifth Nation, and the more minor stuff, like even on the arts, which are very generic items, it says stuff like, this is a scroll that documents the lineage of lightning bending in the Fire Nation. It's like, even though you don't get the details on it, it makes sense what a lot of the stuff is. So I can see the game getting to a point where there's quite a bit of good stuff here. And especially now that we know the Kyoshi content, at least the early stuff they're going to put in for Kyoshi, will be an adaptation of The Rise of Kyoshi. That's good to know, because I think a lot of people are going to experience the plot of that book through this game. So that's pretty good. But what were your thoughts on that? Like the kind of avatar-ness of the game. Is this just an Avatar skin over a typical system, or do you really think that this is like built around Avatar?
Oh no, I think it really is built around it, or at least, they know enough to make it really feel like it's part of, that sort of world and the system and sort of like, traveling from place to place and, the time it takes you to get there and, how they, factor that into everything and how, eventually things start taking longer and longer to get from places to places. So no, I think they definitely have that sort of, and there's definitely not like a skin or, we've seen, a bunch of those and we've mentioned a few of those where, they just sort of get the character models and they sort of get, some sound bites and they integrate them into the already system. So no, this is definitely a game, for Avatar, directly, at the mobile game scale, which, still takes a ton of work and stuff to sort of get it together and whatnot. So it definitely has a lot, going for it. We'll see how long it goes and the attention that it can garner and stuff like that. And, if there are other, games that they say they're developing do come out, how it'll fit in that whole sort of ecosystem of games. But no, it's definitely Avatar game.
You mentioned the new stuff in here. That yeah, it's not just directly they do episode 1, 2, 3, 4. A lot of the times there is a sort of other area that's sort of placed in between an episode that isn't super important, but there's like something to it, and this is where some of the new characters get introduced. I wouldn't say it's anything crazy that is just like you are crazy missing out if you don't play the game. I wouldn't say there's really anything super significant in terms of plot. Like the first area, the mountain passage, is just you interact with a dojo that is in the kind of lower section of the Batola mountain range, and there's this mysterious dojo master character, which is a quite cool design, and there's almost the implication that there's a bit more to that character's story, but other than just the fact that they are a master of all Jings, all of them, not just the main three, there's not too much to say about that character. I'd say Kiwok is probably the most interesting new character because it's basically alluded to the fact that this is sort of a modern day descendant of Fifth Nation characters, and that potentially she is like directly related to Tagaka in the past, because we basically know she is in possession of Tagaka's sword. That's probably the most interesting thing. Otherwise, it's very sort of like standard, the basic kind of like expansion of story you'd expect. Like in the most recent Omashu thing, the little bits of extra stuff that you get are just that, oh, instead of the gang just getting onto the delivery system, you have a tiny plot as you have to sort of get past the guard for the delivery chutes, where like you give him food that you get from one of the Omashu restaurants. Very tiny little things that don't really add much more, but it's just like, here's a way to have more nodes on the map, apart from just one, basically. But what are your thoughts on some of the kind of newer content to this game?
Yeah, like you mentioned, they do have that in there. And I think, for fleshing out the story, in terms of like game mechanics and stuff like that, like you would have to have those to some regard. Otherwise, it would really be just sort of like a one-to-one interpretation of the series, which I'm sure some people wouldn't mind. And if it was maybe sort of like a larger scale game, that might actually even be more warranted. But I think for what they're trying to go here and to sort of, give you a bit more of a experience rather than just a rehash of the series, which I'm sure they've had other interactive things that have been literally just that, in the past and whatnot. I think they're trying to at least add a little bit more. At least that seems to be what we're getting with, a lot of the new content that we're getting out now from the different sort of, cross media platforms and whatnot. Like they're attempting to add a little bit extra into the current, mythos, and it seems like it's all being, led towards a specific route by Avatar Studios.
Mm-hmm. And then in terms of some of the more negatives, I think the core negative is probably just that I think they do need to adjust the sort of like a currency kind of like economy. Like I don't know what the best way to describe it overall is, but just there's a lot of currencies in the game, and how easy or not they are to earn, because you need like there's so many different materials in this game. That's one of the bigger things, is just that there's specific materials for each like type of character. Each character has like 3 levels of material, but then there's another one that more aligns with the not just their attack defense or whatever, but like what like nation they're from and stuff like this. So there's a ton of materials that you are managing, and ultimately you're using like stamina to sort of get that material, and it feels like you're being kind of limited on that front. Similarly with the summoning system, of course, this is where we have to get into this. I do feel that like they currently don't have the sort of value of what like effectively one summon ticket is, or 100 nature stones is, down correctly in the game. Some points it feels like, oh yeah, this is the right amount for this amount of currency. Other times it feels like, really, I only got like 15 nature stones for that. They need to, I think, work on that to where, even if you only log in, it does kind of feel like you should get like a summon a day at least, rather than having to like do quite a bit to get that one summon. It's been okay so far because they've had constant event banners going, so like you've been getting a lot of extra stuff. But if they slow that down at all, I think it's going to become very clear that like the economy in the game doesn't quite work, and you're going to like really force people to kind of buy stuff, which is like the other problem, I think, is that I really don't see a lot of value in the actual like money value of items in the store. I've not spent any money on this game so far, but even if I really, really wanted to, I don't really see the value in like any of the stuff in the store. It just feels like I said earlier, they're overvaluing how much like one summon is, how much 10 summons are, and even stuff like they have the whole summon mileage system to eventually get you the kind of rare currency to buy something in the shop. It's like 200 to get that. And then the new banners that come in, they have some sort of like bad luck protection, but it's after 200 summons, or in the Aang banner at the moment, 300. That's a bit much, I think. Plus, I would say the other major problem, you get way too many relics from summons. Like, they need to balance that out, where most people are having a drought of like barely ever getting characters, but also you'd say there's also a drought of barely ever getting animals, pets out of the summon banners either. So that needs to be, I think, adjusted as well, because how many silver lilies do you need to get in a row before like you just kind of give up on the game? But what are your thoughts on that? This was kind of the big maybe fear with this game being like this, is how is this all going to work? How's it been for you?
Yeah, it definitely has been sort of a mixed bag in terms of that, because there are some times where you're getting items and it seems like you have too much of them, but you still can't sort of upgrade or ascend your characters, or go towards the next progression that you need to, for the story purposes, and just for moving around. So yeah, that definitely does seem a bit sort of, I don't know, disappointing. I mean, that is an unfortunate sort of factor of these games in general. So how they balance that, definitely something that maybe they'll be able to sort of figure out a bit better over time. I haven't spent any money on the game yet either, but I haven't been playing it super much like that. But yeah, it definitely does seem like you can get sort of stuck, I guess, essentially, or almost feel like you sort of have the need for that, which, depending on how you play these games, you might be more compelled than others to do that. So that's kind of the unfortunate, I guess, just the gotcha of the game itself. So I don't know. I hope they definitely can sort of balance that a bit better so that it's not all that way. But yeah,
like I think they could ease it a little bit. Like there's a few in the shop for not for money, just the like item exchange shops, especially the boss battle store. You can get basically most of the items in there for boss battle coins, but everything's on like a timer. So if you buy like 3 of this item, it's on like a week cooldown until you can get that item again. And that's what I think is really slowing down a lot of players, is that I need 30 level 2 offense beads to upgrade my character. I can get like 10 of them from the store currently, and I have a few of them, but I have to wait a week to get the others. It's that sort of thing where like I'm at the point now where like I have one character who's basically nearly max level. Like I've done the final kind of level up. I just have to actually get Aang to level 70. But even that is like, it's going to cost like 1 million coins and stuff like that, and I'm just prioritizing other stuff. But otherwise, like I have 2 or 3 characters who are level 50, and I have to be so careful about choosing the next one I want to level up to that, because I'm at the point where it's very easy. Like it's not a problem at all. I can get a new character and go from level 0 to level 30, no problem, because I have all those materials. That's the level 1 stuff. But it just it slows to a crawl after that. Upgrading a character from level 30 to level 40 is difficult because the level 2 materials are arguably harder to get than some of the level 3 materials in a way. So there's some adjustments that are needed. The other issue is that, like I said, we just got the Omashu update now, a month into the game. So to clarify, the game only has now the first 5 episodes of Avatar in. I don't think anyone expected that would be like the release cadence of this, like, at all prior to release. And it seems like it's very, very slow. Like, I think the developers want to put out a roadmap, but they've basically said they can't because a roadmap would have to be approved by Avatar Studios, basically, and that doesn't seem to be happening. But it's weird because it feels like we need to know when episode 6 is coming, because they're already like teasing the idea that eventually Kyoshi stuff is going to be in the game, Korra stuff is going to be in the game. But if it's such a struggle to get through early ATLA, what exactly are we doing here? I think we need to get a sense for what the content rollout is actually going to be, because at this rate, like 1 episode a month, plus some of those months could be extra stuff in between episodes, it's going to be years for us to finish ATLA, let alone get to the Roku content that we all kind of want. What are your thoughts on how that side of things has kind of worked out like a month into launch?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess, the development cycle for games, depending on, the team and sort of the backend they have, can vary pretty wildly. But yeah, with them having to sort of, have this sort of oversight, which is, both good and bad, because it's good because it's, hopefully it's more cohesive and it makes sense and it's fun to play. But yeah, it definitely does sort of put a hamper on sort of the pre-planning, where it's sort of just going step by step. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's some way they can do some sort of general overview of, the plan of where things can go without giving any sort of, specifics, so that they can at least, alert the people who are, really interested and invested in the game. And, hopefully that can, bring more people if they can see where things are going to go down the line, rather than just sort of leaving them a bit sort of in limbo. But yeah, it does make you wonder, when would they ever get to any of the extra content, unless they're just going to do it sort of just out of sequence. Like, it's a game. It doesn't necessarily have to be in sequence, even though that's the whole sort of, draw of Avatar and everything, and the story and the journey and whatnot. But maybe, they do sort of make some other parts that are sort of like out of the line of things. I don't know.
Yeah, like the one thing they mentioned, I think it was almost directly to me on their Discord, was in relation to like the other era content, is that they are planning to have some of that in the game before the end of the year. So they're not finishing ATLA before that. So it's all about like how they're going to do that. I think the only way they can do that, because the map will be different across eras, is when you click the adventure button, you're going to be asked to choose which like era map you want to go into. I think that's the only way you can, like, I think effectively do it. And sure, some of the areas are going to be very similar, but they'll have different like things going on in that era. Like Omashu and Kyoshi's era will be different than Aang's era, even though it might look similar. And then they obviously will have new areas as well. And I think that's the way they're going to have to do it. How exactly they do that rollout, in that, for the story reasons, I guess that means they would have to like give you a free Kyoshi, maybe even a free Rangi, to get through the Rise of Kyoshi and see how it goes from there. But I think that's probably how it's going to have to work. And I think once we get to that point, I think it could be really cool, because then theoretically you do have lots and lots of summon banners for different eras going on at the same time. The game feels a little bit kind of like slightly boring at the moment, when it's all early ATLA characters for the most part in it. You're like, oh, Tyro, I got Tyro. Wait, Tyro's not that interesting of a character. So yeah, I suppose just the final thing on this is just when you're like a new account, you do get a bunch of free stuff. Like, did you pull any interesting characters in from what you were able to get?
No, I didn't really pull any sort of interesting characters from that. And I think I got like if you signed up ahead of time, on the site and stuff, you got like all the extra like stuff and whatnot. So I got a lot of that, but no, not really.
Yeah, like I would say describe my look on the gotcha pull stuff as being exceptionally bad early on, but actually surprisingly good the last few weeks. Like I was really lucky and I got like Boomy from the current event in like the first couple of pulls,
Oh,
so
nice.
I was good. But for instance, like the Suki event within like the first week, I think it took until like 170 like summons to finally get one Suki. And then this is the other part about this is to get the character at sort of their maximum power level, you basically need to pull the character 6 times because you need to get their skill coin 5 times
Mhm.
to level up their skills. Otherwise, they're a little underpowered. So that's kind of the other point. That's a bit tricky. But anyway, like it's something I think it will get better over time. I almost feel they launched it a little early. They probably maybe should have waited to launch it with at
Hmm.
least Omashu inside. But you know, it's working for them overall, and I think it will improve over time. Next piece of news is another kind of bigger one, and that is Azula in the Spirit Temple has finally been officially revealed, announced. It's coming September 26th/27th, and so unfortunately it has already been delayed from summer to September, late September, and it might be delayed again. We can never really trust these dates once we get them. We did get the description as well, which is Azula continues her destabilization campaign against the Fire Nation and her brother, Fire Lord Zuko. But after a failed attack on her latest target, Azula finds herself in a mysterious forest temple inhabited by a solitary monk. What first seems like a place to safely pass the night is quickly revealed to be something horrifyingly different. Azula is forced to confront her past and will finally face her chance at redemption, but will she take it? So big takeaways initially from that. Obviously, that confirms it's set post Smoke and Shadow, which is what we've all been waiting for and waiting to hear about. It means we will get advancement on Azula's story, but it's also important to keep in mind this is just a one book, 172-page comic. We'll get 72 pages of content. They're teasing Azula's redemption, but I think it's probably all but confirmed. Like it's not all going to happen in this book. You have to view this as being a step in Azula's journey rather than they're almost teasing the idea it will all happen here. But I think this will still be an important book. It's just all about the execution now. There's been a lot of build up to this. It's been 7 years since Smoke and Shadow came out. 7 years waiting for this advancement in the story. But you do have to view this as probably being a middle point between the comics that we had before and likely where they'll properly do big stuff with Azula in one of the Avatar Studios movie projects, whether it be the first Aang movie that we know about or the rumored Zuko movie. But this, I think, will be important to know going in at the very least. But Greg, what are your thoughts on what we now know about the new Azula comic?
Yeah, I mean, this sounds pretty cool. It definitely sounds, in line of what we've been hoping for in terms of her story. And, like you said, it really is about how they, sort of choose to, angle this part of her character arc and, where it puts her on the path of whichever route, they choose to go with her. Since, like you said, it is sort of, a set sort of story here. And, I think it's one of the things that they realize is one of the more popular things. So of course they're going to want to over time give it more of a feature in sort of their new way of doing their media and their properties and whatnot. So yeah, I think don't maybe now go sort of like super crazy in terms of your expectations for this, but it definitely seems like it's going to be a good read regardless.
So yeah, there's a few specific things to talk about. Obviously, the destabilization campaign is her and the Fire Warriors attempting to turn Zuko into the leader Azula feels the Fire Nation needs. I like that they mention a failed attack, highlighting that, like, I think the correct interpretation from Smoke and Shadow is that Azula doesn't get that she is the one in the wrong here. She thinks this is the right thing to do, but it's not. And so another failure. We know from the 2 preview pages already that it seems like this book at the very least will separate her from the Fire Warriors, whether that be them leaving her or something like that. But yeah, the first, I think, truly mysterious thing is obviously the solitary monk. So they're not just teasing like empty spirit temple type stuff, but there's a monk in here. Now, it might turn out that actually the spirit, but interesting to see what this is. I think most people agree it's not going to be a character we know. This is not going to be Guru Patik or something like that. But do you have any thoughts on this? Like what the solitary monk is going to be here to do about... Because we assume this is a Fire Nation spirit temple based on her doing stuff in the Fire Nation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder about that, because I mean, you would think maybe they might have some way of like linking it with like a character that we've seen before, but I don't know. I think it's cool that it might be someone new that we're sort of trying to understand, that's going to really sort of, I don't know, put Azula on this potential path that we're going for here, because I think probably someone, you know, potentially from like the outside of things might be more suited for Azula and a character, the way that she's adding her sort of like mental state and things, especially with, you know, sort of everything that she just recently tried with the destabilization and whatnot. So yeah, I think I don't know, sounds pretty intriguing the way they're going for it.
Mm-hmm. And then yeah, like you get the idea that okay, things go smoothly initially, but then things change and they become horrifyingly different. It's interesting they're using the word horrifying, so you assume like dark spirits related stuff is going to come into play here. And then she's forced to confront her past, which is very interesting, because you think about like Azula and like, is there some specific moment they're talking about here, or is this just like Azula as a villain being reflected back on her, that like, this is what you've been doing this whole time. Look at it truly in the context of you failed up to now. This is why you failed. Is that what they're doing? Or is it some sort of very, very specific moment? Because I think the big point a lot of people agree on is that Azula, up to now, doesn't really realize she needs to change. So she needs to be shown her errors to potentially make a change. What are your thoughts on the whole confront her past part?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot to unpack there in terms of like, you know, everything that she's done in the past and how she, you know, like you're saying, how she currently views it, and how she, you know, just per her character personality is always sort of, I'm in the right, you're in the wrong type of thing. And, you know, it even seems like, you know, sometimes where she seems like she might sort of understand, you know, sort of the bigger picture of the, I guess, sort of morality of what she's doing. She doesn't quite get it up until this point. So I don't know. I mean, it feels like that's a lot. So I would think maybe they might go for maybe a couple points in this, just to sort of hammer home, you know, what it is and force her to sort of come to terms with that, but not sort of give us any sort of big picture resolution on it, since, you know, things are probably going to continue on after this. That would just be my guess on that.
Yeah, like in terms of, I suppose, like in a comic, I kind of wonder, like, are we going to see her like being shown like her shooting lightning at Aang, like killing him basically, her injuring Iroh in that moment, her being dishonorable in the final Agni Kai, that sort of stuff, like the truly kind of like bad acts of Azula that she would actually have to kind of redeem herself for. Otherwise, it's like it's a general kind of scope of everything she's done in the entire series. It will be interesting, because like they're directly saying redemption in the description of the book. Will she take it? I think everything points to she's not going to take it in this book, but that even her considering it is a huge potential thing for the character. And it's always there, even if she doesn't, because this is kind of, you know, this is how you do the good redemptions, is you always have a further fall before the eventual kind of like turnaround. That's what they did with Zuko. But of course, Azula's story is different, so we have to wait and see what exactly happens. But is that your interpretation as well, that they'll use this as a midway point between this and likely utilizing her in a Avatar Studios animated project?
Yeah, I mean, I can't see why they wouldn't use her in, you know, a bigger project, considering how popular a character she is. So I don't know. I think this definitely, especially since we know that all the stuff is sort of going through one sort of funnel now, that this feels more like, you know, it would be sort of a a tie-in lead into something bigger, just because of how they're sort of pushing things forwards. It may be a couple years until we actually see what that actually sort of turns out to be, but I think that would be the route that they might go for.
Yeah, and then maybe even just looking at it from like an ease of explaining Azula perspective, even if the main result out of this book is separating her from the Fire Warriors, that's probably for the best. That way, when you do reintroduce Azula in an animated project, you just need to explain Azula rather than, wait, who are these people she's with, and what's the Kimura Kage? What was that all about? Like, you don't need to go into that level of detail on the plot, but people want to know the general idea of what Azula has been up to. And I think that's a bit easier to explain if she is kind of on her own, doing her own thing, rather than running an entire group. But yeah, we have to wait until September for that. That likely means that it'll be like, what, June maybe for preview pages for this, maybe like review copies if I can get one. So we're still like a bit away from this, if even that. Probably more like July actually. But there's that. Very also briefly on this side of things, the Imbalance Omnibus was also announced for release. The only thing I'll say on this is just that, it's basically the last reprint Dark Horse has to announce. After that, yes, there's still a few short stories that eventually need to get collected, but they've done all their reprints. There's no more omnibuses after this point, no more hardcovers. They just have new stuff basically to do from here on out. So I'm glad we're getting through that. We finally have everything announced, and by the end of the year, everything will be available in that format. Do you have any thoughts on the Imbalance Omnibus?
No, that's us. I guess they really, pushed all of those through in pretty decent pace, I guess, considering how they were going for with those.
Yep. The cover, I suppose, there's a little bit to talk about. Like, they did sort of mess up the sort of style of the covers, in that Peter Wortman just did another Imbalance cover instead of in any way an attempt being made to match the white background focused characters style of the Guru covers. It just looks a bit weird when you show an image of the 6 of them in sequence and one of them is just a normal cover. But anyway, then we get into some of the Avatar Studios rumors that hit over the last few weeks. So basically all of these come from Avatar News or, some of the other kind of insiders over the last few weeks. So one of the more interesting ones was apparently one of the projects that's going to be within the first 3 years of Avatar Studios is going to be a preschool series that will be the new series for 2026 to go alongside the rumored Zuko movie also in 2026. So there's basically no other information apart from the demographic idea that they are going to do a series aimed for preschoolers. Now, this should make a lot of sense to you because of the way they've always described Avatar Studios. Yes, multiple projects, but they are also aiming for multiple audiences as well. Now, it probably likely means that we can go in both directions. We can go aim at younger audiences, but it probably means that some of the projects can also be a little bit, maybe skew a little bit older ultimately. But I saw a few reactions to this of just like, why are they doing this? This could be something else. But I think from a business perspective, it makes sense that they're trying to also create a little bit more of a gateway for an even younger audience for the series. And if this is what we need to do to get all the other projects, is to have a kids show for kind of Paramount, I think that's fine. And there are, I think, ways to utilize a very young show to do something different with Avatar as well. So once there's some creativity and good writing involved here, I think this is going to be perfectly fine. But what are your thoughts on this? A preschool series for Avatar Studio?
Yeah, I mean, from like the older people perspective, yeah, it might seem a bit odd, but they're trying to push this forward for like, continuing on as like a bigger sort of enterprise project that's gonna, cross generations and stuff like that. So, keeping that in mind, it doesn't surprise me that they would try to go for this, just to try to cover, as many different markets as they can, especially since, some of the people that, started watching the show when they were younger are now older and have their own kids. So, it kind of makes sense that you can include sort of like the whole, family in a sort of a production this sort of way. So yeah, I mean, I think, it'll be interesting to see, how they, sort of style it and everything like that. Like if they go more to sort of like chibi like we've seen before, if they do something completely different, who knows? But yeah, it's definitely something to, I guess, sort of keep in mind as they go forward with, hopefully making, just more Avatar stuff in general, that it'll include, a wider range of what, we might think they should go for.
Hmm. I think, yeah, for me, the most interesting thing with this is sort of like, what characters do they use here? Do they create new young characters and make it like its own new thing? Or are they going to utilize like the pre-existing characters and just have them do stuff that's more for preschoolers? Because I guess you're trying to use this as an on-ramp for the other stuff. So to me, it feels a little bit weird if this is going to be the preschool adventures with like Aang's team Avatar, and then you're eventually going to get them to watch actual Avatar. That feels a bit like not the best way to do it. So I personally, I think, would want more of like just unique characters to introduce the world of Avatar, and then ATLA could still be the introduction to the ATLA characters. You can allude to Aang in the preschool show as like a character who exists in the franchise, but I'm not sure I want the full cast to just be the same cast necessarily. I can see from maybe a marketing perspective why you would want to do that, but I'm not sure if it necessarily solves your issue. Now, maybe because it's for preschoolers, that sort of kind of continuity maybe stuff doesn't matter too much. But I've made it very clear I don't really like the chibi comic that just came out, and in a way, like, I don't want the preschool series to just do that style. But what are your thoughts on that? What way should they do like characters new or existing for this series?
No, that's a good point. How would they do that? Is it going to be completely sort of like original, just set in the world and have sort of the overarching sort of themes and stuff? Or are they really going to go, sort of like you said, with sort of like the chibi sort of just characters just placed in different situations? I mean, I don't know. I think, it can go either way. I mean, for stuff that's really for kids, it really can be sort of like a sort of isolated own world. And I think, regardless of if it's isolated or not, it'll still, as the kids or, whatever get older, it'll still, incline them towards the other stories, regardless of how sort of like media tie-in it is. So I don't know. I mean, it could even be something simple as it's just sort of like maybe about the creatures of the world of Avatar with, some other random characters. Like there's a bunch of different ways that they can go about it. I don't particularly feel one way or the other if it has like the main characters, because it really is sort of really targeted at its own sort of audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just everyone should remember, this is likely going to be one of like 10 animated things that they're working on. So there are like 9 projects that are probably more for a hardcore fan. This one, it can exist. You can allow this to be the kids show that you're maybe not interested in. It's fine. The other one that came, I think, basically the day afterwards with this is that, again, from Avatar News, apparently we now know that the animated movie for 2027, so again, from the first 3 years, this is the third of those years after launch. The movie will be about the Earth Avatar after Korra. So for anyone who forgets, the series planned for 2025 is meant to be the first season of the Earth Avatar show. And then this is the movie that's apparently maybe meant to finish off the Earth Avatar story in 2027. I don't think there's currently any information on how like multiple seasons of the show are going to work, but I think it could very much fit in that like the preschool series for 2026 is purely like an extra thing, and we still get season 2 of the Earth Avatar show. So we potentially have season 1, season 2, and then maybe season 3 and movie for 2027, or just the movie to maybe wrap things up or be a look into the future for the Earth Avatar. Again, we've discussed the Earth Avatar before, but what are your thoughts on kind of this approach with sort of like the new era they're going to introduce for Avatar Studios of doing a series and also having like a movie for that Avatar as well, just a couple of years after the kind of introduction.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's kind of cool to go with that route. I mean, I feel like that used to be sort of a thing that they tried to do before, where they would have like sort of a movie to sort of, end cap the series or whatever, or to sort of attempt to answer any sort of, lingering questions that they have. So I don't know. I think for me, I think that's kind of a neat way to go about it, even if it is, no, it doesn't have to be sort of like a big movie that has to be like sort of like in theaters and stuff like that. Although, the way things go now, who knows how that'll even be, a focus for. But I don't know. I think the idea of having sort of a larger project to sort of capstone the series is a neat way to go about it. And, if it makes it look a little bit better, a little bit higher production value, then, I'm all for that if they go that route, if they can keep everything in line with, everything that's going on, which, considering they're using multiple vendors for producing this stuff, it seems like it's something that could reasonably do if they have sort of the backing that they seem to have to do it.
Mm-hmm. Then we have an interesting one. We have the Brian Konietzko interview on the official Avatar The Last Airbender YouTube channel. I think when everyone saw this go up, before they watched it, they were like, oh, we're getting big news. This has to be big news. It's like the first time the official channel has really done something like this. But then you watch it and it feels oddly like weird that this is kind of the first time they're doing something like this. Because like their title seems to almost allude to the idea that Brian is going to talk a little bit more in depth about Avatar Studios. But it's kind of just a very vague mention at the end, and this is mostly almost like a, hey, in case you guys missed it, here's why there's been such a gap between the end of Korra and us making Avatar Studio. Here's us explaining the burnout kind of situation, and he talks a little bit about animation, and I suppose what he views as being the biggest advancement in animation in the last couple of years, that I guess will be where sort of Avatar Studios animation makes its like gains compared to Korra. But very unspecific about Avatar Studios. Literally just mentioning we're doing a movie. Not even the fact that that movie is dated for October 2025. Not even that it's the ATLA movie. As many have said, I said it myself, if this interview had come out in 2021, it would have been like, cool. If it came out last year, it would have been like, eh. Coming out now, it just feels like a bit like it's nice to start stuff on the channel, but this feels a bit out of date already. But, it was, I suppose, they never overly advertised it as something new, but I still feel like the title is a little bit clickbaity for what it actually is. Even though, like, again, I always like a Brian interview. But what were your thoughts on this, like, official Brian interview on the official channel?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I try to like sort of step back and think about it, because like if I didn't know anything at all, it probably would be, pretty interesting to sort of see this now and to sort of, understand where things might be going. But, considering, when they, officially announced this and everything, and sort of all the sort of buzz that's happened after it, I definitely, understand the mentality that this feels a little bit sort of just, kind of late after everything, right? But I mean, the interview itself was fine. It was cool. It's, like you said, it's always nice to hear him speak and understand the mentality of, where they're trying to push things forward, which, from everything that we've seen before, if you've been, following things, of course, that, it pretty much falls in line with what you sort of expect and what you've heard, already probably a couple times at this point. So, but again, it's for YouTube, it's for that specific YouTube channel. Like I haven't really seen it pushed a lot of other places other than, people specifically mentioning it. So in terms of, what they're going for and, who they're gearing this sort of interview for, it seems as pretty much spot on it. If you read like sort of the comments and stuff for a lot of the ones on that video itself. But yeah, otherwise it's just like, okay, cool. I mean, things are still going. It's still going to be, a year, 2, 3, 4 until, we really sort of see stuff. So I don't know. I hope they do maybe more stuff like that now going forward. If, they feel sort of compelled and there's stuff that they can really go for it. And, if they are, actually trying to sort of tweak sort of that YouTube channel into more of that sort of stuff, as sort of like a main sort of hub for this. I think that could be pretty cool, but we'll have to see where they go for that.
Yeah, I think that channel has always just kind of felt weird because, like, I believe on the channel that Brian interview is right next to like their previous video on the channel, which was like an Earthbender tier list, and I'm like, why is the official channel basically doing the fan discussion like tier list style video thing? And that's always been the problem of like the difference between them actually presenting proper news, which I assume they're going to be like when we get a trailer for this stuff, new projects, it's gonna go up here, and it almost feels like it shouldn't because this is the kind of like half official, half fan channel thing that's in a weird spot, that they need to evolve into something better, because it was so weird, almost the timing of this. It almost matched up like day for day, give or take a few days, with exactly 2 years post announcement of Avatar Studios. So like that's why I mentioned 2021 and 2022, because it's been 2 full years of us knowing about this. Now it's become abundantly clear they just announced it way too early compared to like anything that was actually going to come out. Like, everyone I think has forgotten already that in that initial announcement it said that there would be Avatar stuff on Paramount Plus within 2 years. That hasn't happened. It's basically, from that perspective, been pushed back effectively by 2 years, if you look at it that way. And there's more of just, I think, people asking the question of like, okay, when are we actually going to start official communication on this? When are we going to get a website for Avatar and actually begin to fully clarify this stuff? Like, it does feel weird in a way that nowhere in this, even edited it in at the end, that they don't mention the idea that the first movie is this, is coming out on this exact date. Like, it has an exact date, that they almost don't want people to know that. And that's almost like that date exists only for like investors in a way, and it's not really for fans. And that's the stuff that needs to change, is that it is so difficult to explain to new people what all the news in Avatar Studios is, because it comes from all over the place. Very little of it comes like directly from Avatar Studios. But yeah, hopefully we just get more of that. Then we just have a bunch of quick fire ones in terms of news. Takeshi Furukawa has been announced as the composer for the live action Avatar Netflix show. So there's a little bit on this, that he's best known for working the composers on Star Wars The Clone Wars, and also he posted and basically revealed that I think he has access to the ATLA tracks to utilize in the show, as well as, I suppose, potentially new stuff. So that's kind of interesting that they're gonna do some interesting, I guess, blend of just flat out using the music of Avatar, but then some new stuff. That will be very interesting to see how it works out. But do you have any thoughts on the new composer?
No, not particularly. I mean, I think it's cool that, we're just seeing more and more of, I guess, sort of the integration of everything, and they're willing to use, sort of the original stuff and their sort of production and stuff like that, which is what we've heard before. So it's just cool to see that going forward.
More rumors for Avatar Studios stuff. Kenneth Lin is apparently going to be the writer for the first Avatar movie. I think his best credit on other shows is as a writer of a few episodes of House of Cards. Otherwise, I think he's mainly known for being like a theater kind of writer. So I don't think many people are super familiar with him, but it is interesting that the writer is not one of the Avatar Korra veterans necessarily. They've brought someone in, which is sort of interesting by itself for this movie, like the first time Avatar is doing a movie. Do you have any thoughts on the writer kind of decision here?
I don't know. I think we've known that they were going to eventually bring in other people and stuff like that. So I get we sort of know sort of the core, from the past and everything, core group of writers and stuff like that. So it should just be cool to see another person's take on it.
Mm-hmm. And then there have been 2 rumors about what the potential title for the first movie are going to be. One of them, and this came from someone who works at Avatar Studios, their LinkedIn mentioned that they're working on currently Avatar The Last Airbender Echoes and Aftershocks. But then the more recent rumor is suggesting that it might actually be called Hidden Kingdom. Because most people, I think, came to the conclusion that, look, Echoes and Aftershocks, like, I guess could work, but it doesn't really feel like the title for the first big movie. Hidden Kingdom, at least, I think, can work, even though it also, you could say, feels a little generic. There's at least a little bit more to Hidden Kingdom, and like you can maybe theorize a little bit more about it. But it's interesting that we're beginning to get all this stuff. But do you have any thoughts on either of these two names and what you think's going on here?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, clearly all this stuff is still in flux and it could be, something completely different when everything does come out eventually. But I guess it's cool that, the rumor mill is going and, people are interested in it. So that's why they're looking out for this stuff.
Yeah, and then just really quickly, the only thing I could think of for like Hidden Kingdom is just Earth Kingdom history. There were other places that had kings in the past, even currently. Like Omashu has a king. Ba Sing Se, of course, we know has a king. Tianhai Shi, from the novels and the comics, that had a king. Like Lady Tianhai's kind of husband was a king. That's interesting. So it kind of implies that there's maybe more of them from the past. And if we're forming a new nation in this era of Avatar, it would make sense that maybe we might also potentially see the return of some of these places, hoping to get some power. That might be one way to do it. Is this referring to the Bonte tribe where Aang finds the Sky Bison, or somewhere kind of completely different? It's interesting to speculate about exactly what they're going to do, because I think most people are kind of laser focused on it's something related to Republic City, but then Hidden Kingdom doesn't really match up with that. And in many ways it kind of feels like it would almost be a mistake to overly focus this movie on Republic City. So do you have any thoughts about like just like if it is Hidden Kingdom, like what that could theoretically mean for a plot of that movie?
Yeah, that's a good one. I don't know. I mean, I always think of Bonte Island when I think of hidden things, but yeah, I mean, the idea that there's other sort of nations that have, hidden kingdoms that we could potentially be involved with. I mean, that sounds like a cool idea that they could go with, and how that plays with like the world at large and how, everyone works together or doesn't work together. But yeah, I don't know. There's still a lot that they can go with, so I'm sort of waiting around.
Mm-hmm. And the most recent Avatar Studios rumor from just a few days ago is that apparently, according to insiders again, Aang is going to be 24 in the new movie, meaning that Katara will be 26, Sokka 27, Zuko 28, Toph will also be 24. It also said that Aang and Katara specifically will be the leads. Sokka will be more of a support character in the movie, and then Toph and Zuko will be in there, but it's unknown the exact nature of their roles. So that seems to fit. They're saying Aang and friends, Aang and Katara are in the relationship, so it makes sense that those two are going to be kind of focused on together. Interesting. I think it's probably the right decision on the ages is to go more towards the kind of high end of kind of young adult. I think makes a lot of sense. But what are your thoughts if that's going to be the kind of age range for our characters in the first movie?
No, I think that's pretty good. I mean, that's, a good bit from where we have them sort of in the comics and stuff now, but it's not like too far on their journey where there might be other things that interfere with them. So, reasonably, it might make sense that they could actually be, together in some sort of capacity since, as characters grow up, they split apart and stuff like that. So, that I think that definitely could work.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, everyone started speculating about, okay, in terms of like key events, like what does this mean for, say, like the kids of all our cast members? Would any of them be born if this is the age rating? The conclusion I think you come to from like the math basically here is that Aang and Katara might have Bumi at this point. Like I think at most he'll be like 2 years old. He could be newborn in or around this time, or he's born maybe like the year after. It's hard to tell. We never, of course, got Bumi's age, and only have a rough idea based on the family picture, and basically how much older he looks than Tenzin to kind of estimate this off. But the idea is that they could be parents in this movie at this point. Toph wouldn't have kids yet, and then we also don't know Izumi's age, but I think most people think that Izumi is similarly aged to Tenzin, so she probably isn't born yet either. That could be a very interesting thing to do here. Again, I doubt they'll have a thing where like Katara is pregnant throughout the movie, because I think that would probably limit the role that she can have. So I don't know. It's an interesting one to think about, but it's where everyone goes to straight away, because we want those kind of fun moments that, like, if they are parents, that would be great to see. If they're not, that's fine as well. But yeah, we're just waiting for more information. And then the final one, I'll just briefly mention this. With regards to the Kickstarter campaign, they did announce the kind of new product, the starter set for the game, which we've known about for a while, but obviously a bit of controversy came up because suddenly it got revealed that the starter set actually has exclusive content. So it has 2 completely new adventures and also a new set of Twian Law dice that obviously over the course of the Kickstarter campaign, they never told us about this until update 50 is just advertising this. And of course, because they're still in the process of fulfilling the Kickstarter, there naturally was a big issue that came up, that this was effectively an advertisement of a new product that backers don't have or get. And because we already have the main book, a starter set isn't particularly the most interesting thing for people, but it has exclusive content. It naturally created the issue of people are already annoyed with how the project is going, and now you're sort of being asked to like double dip if you want to get all the content. And aiming this at people who have already gone all in on the Kickstarter, it wasn't a great look for Magpie, and it's created a big issue of like, is this okay to do? Is this bad? Is it just unlucky for Magpie that the timing has worked out in this way? But it seems like there's more issues for Magpie going on. The solution to this seems to be that they will offer the adventures for purchase at a later date. We don't know what the pricing is, and it might either solve the issue or make it even worse, depending on how well they price it. But at least there's something being done about it, even if it's not a most amazing solution to the problem. Again, if there was, I think, a clearer separation between the project and this item getting announced, I don't think we'd have as much of a problem. But the problem is it has been announced in the middle of all of this, and it's a Target exclusive, and it seems like that contract is part of why they've had to do this, and that factors into it as well. It's all just a little bit kind of messy, and people are annoyed. I say Magpie are probably annoyed that it's worked out this way as well. But what are your thoughts on the kind of current goings on the Kickstarter?
Yeah, it definitely is something to follow, just to see the reactions and everything to it. And yeah, it is just really bad timing. I mean, I don't know. I think, people probably would still be a little bit miffed, even if they, there was more of a distance between them. It just, I don't know, maybe that's just maybe not the best place to sort of promote that sort of thing, or, wait even longer for that one. But yeah, I mean, it does still seem like a good amount of people are still having issues with getting their orders and stuff, and, damages and stuff like that. But the people who have gotten it, do seem pretty pleased with it so far. But yeah, it is interesting that they have this sort of extra content that we're just not currently able to access yet. But I guess we'll see how it goes going forward.
Yeah, so I think they said the exclusivity ends like April 12th or something like that. So I guess mid-April we'll know what's going on with it. And yeah, I don't remember the details because, again, I didn't look into it too much since I can't obviously read it myself. But by the sounds of it, the Aang era one is something that relates to a different pirate group that we've never heard about before, and then the Korra one is something like the Burning Fuse or something like that, which I'm not really sure about the details on it yet. But again, there's not that much sort of lore content in the adventures, but there's usually a little bit where they introduce a couple of characters, at least a little bit of a setup that is worth kind of knowing about. Only other thing with the Kickstarter is they also have kind of teased the idea that in the coming weeks we are also going to get the first information on the first supplement book. So the first one is Republic City. We got obviously some stuff from New York Comic Con, but we actually don't know a lot about what's actually going to be in these books. We assume there'll be new NPC characters. We assume there'll be new kind of lore and setup information, as well as new rules depending on what they specifically add. But I think they need to go in depth on this when they do announce it, just to make it clear what is and isn't in it. This is an example of like another product where, like, we've known about this for a while. Like, this is not one to get annoyed about in the same way as the other stuff. Again, because they're still fulfilling like Asia and a bunch of replacements and stuff like that. If they do the advertising for that too early, it's a little bit frustrating. But at least this is like a full-on new product that is fully new, and there was always the expectation that we'd have to buy this because it's 100% new content. So, I'm eager to hear about that, because I think if we get new Republic City information in it, that's going to be a pretty good thing. But that is all of the news that we have. We're in March now, so in terms of what we're maybe waiting for this month, hopefully, assuming everything goes as expected, we maybe expect the Dawn of Yang Chen, the Yang Chen novel number 2 to get announced this month, if it lines up in the same way that the schedule for last year. We don't know for sure that that's going to be the case, but everyone really hopes it is, because I think we need that novel this year, I still think, as well, because of the Avatar Studios are not ready to go yet. So I think any new content is them for sure. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you hold out hope that that book will get announced and be released this year, or what are you thinking about the next novel?
Oh, I really do hope it comes out, because, I mean, like you said, any new content is always good. And I think, people were really looking forward to the continuation of that. I know I was. So that would be my hope for sure for that one. But in terms of like the larger scale things and things, slightly getting pushed back, I mean, the fact that we haven't heard as much about that at all doesn't inspire a lot of confidence in that one.
Yeah. The only thing is, like, they never overly like build up to the announcements. Like, the Dawn of Yang Chen just got announced. Like, it literally did. That's just true. Come out of like absolutely nowhere. We had maybe a rough idea that we were building up to something because we had heard about Chronicles of the Avatar before, but the problem is like that, like FCE doesn't like tease anything, or there's been no rumors. We're literally just waiting for like a listing to go up, or like an exclusive news article go up. I assume the listing will go up first, as is always the case. But we'll see what happens there. So we'll move from news into our reviews, and we'll start with Avatar: The Last Airbender. So like I said, we're doing the Book to Earth premiere, 201, The Avatar State. So we're starting a whole new book of Avatar here, Book 2, the book that everyone, I think, acknowledges is the book that really takes Avatar to the next level. And in my mind, they do start it off straight away with the sense that we're immediately doing a little bit more depth. Like, okay, we've got to the Northern Water Tribe. What's the plot now? And we straight away introduce this really interesting dynamic with Aang, the Avatar state, and how he feels about not being able to control it. That will be an ongoing plot for basically the entire rest of the series. Not always the exact focus of the plot, but this is something that will be in the back of your head the entire rest of the way through the series. And then on the Zuko side of things, of course, we have the attempt for Azula to kind of capture them by lying to them, but ultimately they revealed that Zuko and Iroh are on the run and are going to be separated from any sense of support they had from the Fire Nation. And how does that go for Zuko, who is now double in this awful position? Can't capture Aang, and now doesn't even have the support necessarily to make that happen either. So I think this is a fantastic opening episode that immediately, I think, shows a lot of progress within the series. We're still somewhat early on, but I think this is really, really strong, what we get here. So, Greg, what are your thoughts on the Avatar state?
Yeah, I think it does really, push the story forward, because you can really, after the whole season 1, you can really get an idea of what our characters, I guess, sort of like their mental state is really. Like, this really does sort of hammer home sort of what their feelings, how they are trying to deal with the whole war situation, about, how Zuko is, still wanting to get his honor back, but now has this new sort of roadblock in the way of, what he thinks he needs to do, and, just sort of all of their, I guess, sort of interactions. I think it really sort of levels up and builds on this episode, not just with them, themselves and their sort of core groups, but just with, things that hold, like, just the whole idea that, Aang is really sort of, we sort of, made notes before that maybe he was a little bit sort of, too lax in his sort of understanding of the situation that he's in. But this one, does a complete sort of like 180 on that, where he's really feeling it and is trying to sort of push himself in ways that, we realize by the end of the episode he's really just not quite ready for. But this one, really does sort of put that in the forefront, which I think is really a good way of just sort of starting off the season, in general.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we'll start on the Zuko side of the episode, then get into the Aang stuff. So we immediately start with the idea that it's now the 3-year anniversary of Zuko's banishment. So it happened, of course, when he was 13, and the idea is like he's 16 now and he's still banished. And we get this idea at the start, like he still ultimately wants his father's approval. His father's the only one who can give him his honor back and kind of solve the issue that he is in, that he faces. And we obviously get the idea Azula is on the way, as we know from the end of last season. So I think we need to start with just, I suppose, the kind of analysis of like where Zuko is as a character after like season 1 and where we find him at the start here. In my mind, it's interesting because I think you immediately do see like just the slightest sense already that he's having doubts about like if his father's approval is like the only thing that he actually does want. We maybe get more on this as we go into the Azula meeting Iroh and Zuko scene, but I think the whole a man needs his rest kind of scene at the end of season 1, and that he was unwilling to do that, but now he is. He is not so laser focused on this is all I have to do, this is the only thing that I can do. And there's just the slight sense that, okay, he can get slightly past this obsession, but it's still ultimately so far what he wants. There's still a long way to go before we see the redemption for Zuko. But where do you see Zuko as we start this episode?
Yeah, that's a good point there, that, he seems to be slightly more open. And I think, you do sort of get that in this one, because he is willing to go back and sort of just, focus on sort of, getting his honor specifically through his father, rather than just through his own sort of feat. So, he at least initially, has that idea that, family might be a thing that's important, and that, getting back together, regardless of, really, completing your objective might be okay. Now, of course, we know that's all sort of a manipulation here, but, he has that sort of, I guess, idea, mindset, like you're saying, that might be okay for him. But I think it's still, it's still too much dependent on a person and a thing, and, it's not very sort of like intrinsic in him yet. Like that's something that, Iroh's still trying to sort of like beat into him. And, you can see, later on when, Zuko does go off that, he's still not quite there yet, but, he's definitely, getting to a point where he's really sort of, realizing that things aren't necessarily going to go the way that you thought it was going to be from the beginning. And especially since it's been 3 years at this point.
Mm-hmm. So this is also our proper introduction to Azula here. So the way we do the introduction here is we get the do the Tides command, the ship scene that is so often talked about with Azula. It's obviously good because it gets across the idea. This is a character who's like younger than Zuko, but is this prodigy of firebending, but also she's immediately introduced as this amazing. She has no problem ordering these kind of fully grown men, these soldiers around. She's in complete control over them, and in fact intimidates some of them so much that even the captain under her is like almost like terrified, so terrified that he makes the mistake he does at the end of the episode, that this is someone who is going to be so difficult to deal with when she catches up to Zuko and Iroh. It's a fantastic initial scene that shows straight away the control through fear, through intimidation, even on the people who are like commanded to be under her control already. So what are your thoughts on Azula's introduction?
Yeah, no, I think this introduction always stands out to pretty much everyone who watches this series. Like it really does put her at sort of like a a force to be reckoned with just from her general presence, regardless of, what she was born into, and, all the sort of, prestige and lineage that comes behind that. It really does, at least from these initial parts, seem that she actually, warrants that sort of, commanding versus when we, think back to sort of Zuko on his ship and how he was commanding things, how, the crew, regardless of, Zuko being put in a bad position where, like this isn't something that he wanted to do begin with, he just didn't really sort of have that sort of, control either through fear or through, his birthright in order to sort of control his crew. So to see that sort of contrast here in this one is a good, point to make, and to see how that goes, throughout this whole episode and even, later on in what Azula has to do.
Yeah. Like Zuko ultimately gains the trust of the crew through like camaraderie, basically, which is almost like something Azula can't really do. She either has to control them through fear and manipulation, and that works, but it's obviously, as we've later seen in terms of her arc, it creates a bit of a problem for her as well. Then we get into the big scenes, which is obviously she finally goes and just confronts Zuko. So her approach to trying to bring them in is to lie and manipulate, to go in and say that actually, basically, Father has like rescinded your banishment. Like he wants you home. He realizes family is important to him now. He regrets banishing you, and he wants you back. And she's trying to play on the idea that she knows that this engulfs Zuko's life, and that saying this will just get him to join her. This is her trying to manipulate Zuko. And what I love about this scene is that, at least in this scene right here, when she says it, Zuko has a very weird reaction where it's not immediate happiness, because I think he very much struggles to accept this. But for kind of like different reasons to like Iroh. Iroh's like, he knows his brother, that like he wouldn't actually do this. But Zuko doesn't immediately go for that himself. I think this is just a sense for like, it's been 3 years, everything I've been through, why would he just change his mind? Is this real? This is why Zuko is so kind of like in depth as a character, is that like little scenes like this, that he doesn't really know how to feel upon kind of being told, oh yeah, the banishment's over. His reaction is just like, huh? But what are your thoughts on this scene, Azula's lie here, and especially Zuko's reaction?
Yeah, it's just sort of that like disbelief. I mean, I guess, considering the time it took for, this apparent, sort of turn of faith in his sort of banishment to happen, even if it is something that he really, really wants, like, I think, Zuko's character overall really, he thrives on the idea of like completing, something that's been sort of given him, and he has this sort of like objective. So to see, it be sort of rescinded this way, not because he necessarily doesn't trust his father per se in this sort of situation, but just because of, what he's had to go through up until this point is, is sort of a thing that takes him a bit to sort of process, as, Iroh, and Azula mentioned here.
Mm-hmm. And then we do get a cut and we come back, and suddenly Zuko's very happy about it. Like in between scenes, he has come to like accept it and be like, oh, it's over, I can just go home, and it's great. Like he actually cares about me, he wants me back, this is everything I've ever wanted. And Iroh is trying to sort of logically kind of get him to think about this a little bit more and explain like, wait, you know your father, I know him too. Do you really think he would do that? Like, I don't want to destroy your happiness, but do you actually think that this is happening? And Zuko snaps at Iroh and even goes as far as like to suggest that you're just jealous of him. And like he insults Iroh a few times here and says like, you're jealous that like he's the one who's the Fire Lord, you're not. And obviously there's a lot of stuff there between Ozai and Iroh. In fact, this is one of the few times like Iroh even talks about Ozai. They don't mention each other all that much. So this is a really, really important scene that like you almost feel like, oh, is this a kind of like them breaking apart here over this? But of course Iroh does agree that he's going to follow Zuko through this. I think in part because he knows probably there is some sort of manipulation going on here. I'll go to supervise this. But I think it's a nice contrast that Zuko comes to accept it and is happy but Iroh is the one like, no, that's not my brother. He'd never do that ever. That's really good in terms of that relationship. But what are your thoughts on the kind of follow-up scene?
Yeah, it definitely does seem like a 180, but I think, Zuko, despite everything, he does have like a lot of sort of like internal hope that things can be better. Like, even if it's for the wrong reasons, like he wants to believe in certain things. So, I think, after the initial shock of just like, wow, this is like something that I've never thought would happen, he definitely, is like, okay, well, maybe I have done, everything that I could here, and I've already suffered enough so that okay, I can go back, and this will be all right, and then things will get back to the way that they were, and I will have my honor, my birthright, and everything else. But yeah, Iroh definitely, I guess maybe just because he's had more experience with his brother than Zuko has had as his child, that he's just already knows that this just isn't gonna work, and maybe he can just see through Azula better in general than most other people, despite Azula being so proficient at lying.
Yeah, that is one of the big things. Like, this kind of becomes almost a little bit of a kind of bookmark on the series. It's like Azula, basically, when they're in the same room as each other with Zuko, she always shuts down Iroh from talking to Zuko, and she's just like, literally, I think she says like, "Shut up, Uncle," and that's kind of very, very telling, given the whole dragon on each shoulder dynamic that they do with Zuko over the course of the season. But yeah, from here we get the happy moment. They're going home at last. Azula puts on the big act, set course for home, and the captain makes the mistake. He calls them prisoners, and we erupt into a big fight. And I love Iroh. This is one of the few times, of course, we just get to see him just take people out. Like, guards are gone off the kind of the path up to the ship, and Zuko and Azula fight each other for like the first time here. And obviously, like we had the setup from before, Azula can do lightning, and it's all the build up to that. She taunts Zuko, she gets him into position, and then she's just about to like hit him full force with lightning, but we get Iroh can lightning redirect, which we know from before, but here we see like probably one of the more unique examples of it, where like he grabs her hand and full on like just conducts it like through like physical contact through his body away, and knocks her into the ocean. So like one of the few times Azula is just defeated by someone, basically. It's a great scene. It really shows like Iroh's kind of his skill, but also his awareness of the situation, and as well just I suppose like the Zuko Azula dynamic that we know from the last season, that like Zuko, the way he sort of feels about Azula, that like she was born lucky, I was lucky to be born. He has a bit of jealousy about her, and you can see him desperate to prove himself in the fight against her, but she's better than him at that all is really good characterization that kind of comes out here, that again this will come up again. Zuko jumping into a fight when Iroh's basically asking him to retreat, but he doesn't, because it's basically what happens in like the finale as well. But what are your thoughts on the big action set piece here on this side of the episode?
Yeah, no, this definitely is a good one. I mean, it's always cool to see Iroh sort of, actually in the fray of things, since they usually put him towards the side, since he is, sort of OP for most of these situations. But no, I think, Zuko here, we get to see just sort of the breadth of their current sort of skill abilities, which, we pretty much already sort of gathered that would really be the case, but this just sort of hammer homes just sort of, where they're at, and sort of their progression and their firebending, and just sort of their mental states. Like, even though, Zuko isn't like, we've seen that he's not really like that bad of a bender. He's just, this probably just isn't the right sort of mental state for him to even sort of attempt this sort of battle. And, with Azula just being as good as she is, it's just sort of a huge sort of mismatch in this case. But yeah, no, seeing the lightning bending and seeing sort of the redirection in sort of a more direct way, it always is cool to see how they actually sort of play on that, and, to see where that goes going forward.
Mm-hmm. And then the final bit on this side of the episode is the famous top knot cutting off scene. And they're no longer royalty anymore. They don't really have the support in any way of the Fire Nation. they're completely on their own here, like in the Earth Kingdom, just trying to stay undercover. And this is a switch in the dynamic where they are being pursued, almost like a reverse of the previous season, where like he pursued Aang, now he's being pursued by his sister, but he still wants to pursue Aang, and that just changes the dynamic a little. We know Zuko was very frustrated in season 1 when Zhao kind of restricted him from being able to pursue Aang, and now that's just like the default. And it obviously creates, as we go on through the season, this dynamic where Zuko just more has to interact with the people around him in the towns and villages he goes to. And this is where he has that kind of fundamental idea of interacting with the people, realizing people hate the Fire Nation for what they've done. And he will go on to even say that to Ozai much later on in the series because of what he's about to kind of go through. So the setup here, I think, is really, really strong. That it's another example of Zuko being put on the run here, separating him from the Fire Nation support, was the final little kind of like string that needed to be cut to sort of like open Zuko up to this whole other side of things. So what are your thoughts on this scene here? They're now kind of fugitives from the Fire Nation.
Yeah, they are fugitives on the run. And yeah, this is really, it's pretty impactful for them. I mean, really, it's one of those things that defines their character. And it's like you said, this is really what does set them on the path of not really, following the mold of everything that the Fire Nation has been done before. So maybe if this would have gone, the route that they sort of, wanted this to go, they wouldn't have had, Zuko so sort of, on the opposite ends of everything that the Fire Nation has been doing for the last 100 years. So it definitely is a key moment. It's iconic. I think everyone always sort of thinks about this one and, just sort of the significance of cutting the top knot and how that plays into everything that they have to do sort of going forward here. Like you said, just interacting with people, how they have no support at all at this point. They have to figure out how to do it on their own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we have a few other kind of like hair cutting scenes. Like Korra basically gets her version of this scene in like K402. You can even say like a reverse of this is sort of the Aang shaving his hair prior to the invasion as he like returns is sort of like the reverse of this, which is kind of nice. So yeah, this is a really cool thing into the whole like honor dynamic. Is there's also that sense as well. So yeah, the Aang side of this episode. So the setup here is obviously a direct result of what Aang kind of did, under control of like law, of course, to a certain extent, but also the Avatar state as well. What he does when he is out of control in the Avatar state and doing all these crazy things, that it's him, but it's not him purposefully himself choosing to do this. The pain and kind of devastation he can theoretically cause, he has a nightmare about that, and it sets up this arc as we go through this. And specifically with this episode, the idea, what if someone specifically wants to harness the Avatar state and just activate it and send Aang at the Fire Nation? That's General Fong's plan, to just do what they did here, defending the North, but in attacking the Fire Nation. Is that not the easiest way to end the war? Because it seemingly unlocks all of Aang's ability to use all the different elements. What's the problem here? And it just gets into the idea of addressing a lot of the emotions surrounding, is that an okay thing to do? Like, Aang does actually need to learn to control this power eventually. What is it? Gets explored in this episode. I like a lot of what they do around this, throughout this, because it's quite a kind of mature plot point here, especially with sort of like the guilt tripping that kind of General Fong does in relation to the war, that you understand why he kind of says that, and it's important to bring up, but like saying it to 12-year-old Aang, given what he's been through, it's like, that's rough kind of manipulation. What else is he going to do? But it's interesting, and it's you can already see like the deeper level of writing in this one. But so I suppose we'll just jump straight in with that. Like, they meet Fong, and immediately he's like, I want you to face the Fire Lord using the Avatar state. And he does guilt trip Aang by showing them all the injured soldiers. And also he references that like people have died, and people die in the war every day. which is something we've kind of criticized with season one, in that we never really addressed what exactly is happening in the war. Like, are
Mm.
there constant battlefields around the place? And it's obviously, the idea is that there are. So it's good to see that, to highlight that they don't have all the time in the world. One, the comet is coming, but every day people are fighting to resist the Fire Nation, and it's pretty much the Earth Kingdom and a scattered Water Tribe force is the entire defense against the Fire Nation. It's pretty bad. But what are your thoughts on the early setup with General Fong on this side of the episode?
Yeah, it's interesting to see sort of, the perspective of the actual sort of like war effort and what's actually going on, and then to sort of see how that's sort of explained to Aang as a child essentially, and sort of what's really been happening, how things have been going, how people have been surviving, or in many cases not surviving with everything that's going on. And we never get to see anything sort of straight up, but you get the idea of what's going on. And I think Aang definitely feels the burden of his history of just not being there and being absent for this period of time. So you definitely get to see sort of the mental sort of strain and everything on Aang and his just view of things, which I think is important that they finally do eventually bring that to the forefront. Now they still have to do things sort of in a proper way, which they eventually figure out by the end of the episode, but initially it definitely it's something that just sort of overwhelms Aang in his sort of current understanding of how things are going on in the world.
Hmm. Because yeah, he's faced this a little bit before in like the storm with the fisherman, basically saying like, you've been gone, like, look, this has all happened because you're gone. But a lot of the other characters haven't. They've just kind of been happy to have the Avatar back ultimately. But here's another example of it
Hmm.
being kind of like brought up, of like, you have the power to end the war. You're saying you don't want to do that, but it's, even though Aang's had a nightmare about it, it's like, can I really say that like I'm emotionally struggling with this in counter to like 20 injured soldiers who have just come in, and like the idea that people are dying every day. And Aang doesn't like say this to Fong, because I think he realizes Fong probably isn't the sort of character who's going to be understanding of that sort of emotional kind of like issue that you're dealing with. Which is why Katara is so important in this episode, to kind of present that side of things. But it's also that this like Aang says this to Katara at the start. Like they have that scene after the nightmares, and Katara says it as well, that like, for the people who love you, it's difficult to see you in that Avatar state, because she's already calmed him down out of it like once already, kind of half twice in the storm. He nearly went into the Avatar state, so she knows exactly what this is like for him. But it's a really in-depth thing, dealing with the idea of like Aang's guilt, which is kind of all about what his character is about, because he ran away, he feels responsible for what happened in the time he's been gone, and him taking the time he needs is wasting time for other people. It's a tricky situation here. But what are your thoughts on Katara in this episode here, and the way this is where we get the sort of more focus on Aang, like caring for his side of things, part of the episode?
Yeah, Katara is, like you said, she is pretty pivotal to this because she really does have sort of like the counter argument to everything that he's trying to force right now. Like Sokka's sort of just going along with things, but she really, she has the perspective. She's seen what has happened. She understands. I mean, she herself has, directly been impacted by the war. So, if anyone, might be sort of like, more for just sort of ending things and not, having anyone else's family have to deal with what she's going through or what she's gone through, she definitely would be for it. But she definitely, especially since she's recently gone through some training of her own, understands sort of the progression of things and sort of how things have to be developed over time, even though there is all this sort of strife that's going on around them. The shortcut method, even though it might help, some people, it might not be the best way to go about things in the long run, which is definitely, I think, the sort of argument that she's trying to present here, which and doesn't quite get until, near the end of the episode.
So yeah, like we get the whole like montage of the different methods they try to make the Avatar state just happen. Um, it's all for the most part sort of like done with like comedy kind of here of like they try to do like chi enhancing tea, scaring him, these rituals, combining the four elements together, but nothing really works like that. And Aang realizes that, look, the only thing that's actually going to make it happen is if you actually put me in danger or just emotionally like kind of hurt me so much that it just happens on its own. And Fong is just like, oh, well, let's just do that. And so he attacks Aang trying to make this happen. And it's a pretty kind of crazy sequence here because, it's where you realize that I suppose Fong in a way has kind of lost himself with this plan, kind of caring so little for like Aang as a person and just for like what he is, that he's attacking the Avatar with his own men to try and make this thing happen, and not realizing like once he goes into the Avatar state, like you really don't get like how it works. Like it's a defense mechanism and it will defend against what's attacking him, and so far it's the Earth Kingdom soldiers attacking him, not Fire Nation. So it's just a severe lack of understanding on that side of things. And we see Aang, obviously you see he's a full-on master airbender. He can defend all day pretty much against all the earthbenders, including Fong. And you see actually like this is probably one of the few examples where like this is master Katara here. This is one of the few moments where like kind of Katara kind of gets outclassed. Now, admittedly, she has very little water. She's in a place completely surrounded by earth. The earth benders have complete like full setup around her, but General Fong does just defeat Katara basically in basically a one-on-one bending battle. So that's probably like the worst loss that Katara has in the entire series post full training basically. After this, like she's just like got a pretty amazing record in fights after this point. But the idea is that it's Katara arriving onto the battlefield that sort of changes things, and this is how he targets Aang and so on. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on in the fight. Sokka gets involved. There's a lot of moving parts here. Like it's an impressive sequence with all the giant earth discs getting thrown around. But do you have any thoughts on the fight and Fong's plan turning to attack Aang?
Yeah, no, it really is a really good sort of set piece of the episode. And, considering everything that they're trying to sort of make happen, I mean, you really would think that Aang is sort of like, would get overwhelmed in this sort of situation, but he really is, just able to manipulate, just his surroundings and using his abilities to sort of get away from pretty much any situation. Like he definitely has that completely sort of mastered. And, Katara, I mean, yeah, she is fully trained, but I think this is sort of like a situation where she's just not prepared for this sort of, I guess sort of eventuality, and especially just in this instance here, I think experience fighting benders of different type is something that, sort of has to be sort of learned over time, and she has sort of just been focusing on sort of water on water here, as eventually we see her later on pretty much be able to sort of like combat any sort of bender without any sort of issue here. But yeah, definitely he was trying to make a point, General Fong, of how this can be sort of manipulated, and it does sort of work. I mean, he does bring it out, but it's definitely even though he just sort of sees the Avatar state in terms of its just sort of power and its overall sort of strength and sort of what it can do, which is something that, I guess, anyone could sort of like gravitate towards from just or attempting to understand the situation from afar and not really sort of being there and having any sort of connection to it. Because I think, even sort of like, the water tribe, the northern water tribe, wouldn't go along this route just because of their sort of, connection with the spirits and everything like this. But, for someone who's been more sort of hardened on the battlefield, on the front lines of things, and maybe slightly more megalomaniac in terms of how things might get done, doesn't quite have the right sort of grasp of the situation at hand here. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the big moment is obviously he basically captures Katara and proceeds to earthbend her into the ground, really forcing and trying to make Aang emotional about it. And then when he finally puts Katara fully underground, this is what turns the Avatar state on. Except, like I said, it's directed at the people directly attacking the Avatar because it's a defense mechanism, as we will learn very, very shortly. And so Aang just proceeds to just obliterate kind of like Fong's forces here. Like, they don't stand a chance. There's no directing what this is. And before Aang can like really finish the job here, basically Roku sort of takes over and it's just like kind of pulls Aang out to explain what the Avatar state is, stop him from like actually potentially like killing some of these soldiers in this moment. And it's an important scene. Like the description here is by no means like the entire exploration of like the powers of the Avatar, but it makes some key core points that are very, very important. So we get the idea. It's a defense mechanism designed to empower you with the skills and knowledge of all the past avatars. The glow is the combination of all your past lives, focusing their energy through your body. In the Avatar state, you're at your most powerful, but you are also at your most vulnerable. If you're killed in the Avatar state, the reincarnation cycle will be broken. And in a way, it's unusual. Like, you think that this is a really long explanation, but it's very brief and to the point, and a lot of it is done in the visuals. I think it's you can tell it's an early explanation. I think as they went forward, they lent away from certain aspects of this, like, you know, the glow is a combination of all your past lives focusing their energy to your body. That's not exactly the exact case, like, I would say. Like, I think they very much de-emphasize, like, when you're using the Avatar state, the idea that like the past lives are that heavily involved in it. But you know, we can get into a little bit of discussion on that. Even stuff like, say, we see Avatar Zito in this scene. It's clearly meant to be the fire bending example of the Avatar state, but it's lava bending. So at this point, you can tell they hadn't decided on what way that technique would work, and they decided later it's an earth technique, not a fire. But the big point, if you're killed in the Avatar state, the cycle will be broken. That's a key point to all of this. And then probably about the thing I think that they leave out of all of this is the Avatar spirit and its involvement in this. That's probably the main thing that probably should have been explained here, because I think it left a lot of people confused when Beginnings leaned more into that side of things, and people think that it contradicts this when this didn't explain everything. But what are your thoughts on the kind of title of the episode, the explanation here on the Avatar state? How do you feel it sort of stands up as one of our first kind of big lore information drops compared to where we're at now with our knowledge?
Yeah. I mean, I think I definitely can understand your idea where it is sort of like an early sort of, understanding of how they want to really, sort of show the Avatar state and its abilities throughout the whole show and the series going forward. But I think, the core idea of what they're trying to go for here in terms of like, it having, sort of a defense mechanism and how it involves the sort of past lives, it gets the point across, at least, towards what they're trying to go for in this particular story and at this point in time. Like, it's like anything else. It can sort of like evolve as, it goes forward and you're sort of understanding, or even, Aang as a character, like, sure, maybe, if they had thought to the future, they could have, explained it more in depth. But I think, for what Aang needed to know at this point in time for his character and the situation that he was put in, the explanation, the idea that it's more defensive, sort of a last resort type of thing, works in this case. And as he goes forward, he can learn to sort of more directly harness this sort of power. But in this situation here, he really needs to understand that it can't be used as sort of a catch-all disorder, just, defeat the enemy and call it a day, which is sort of what, his sort of dreams and everything was already sort of trying to sort of indicate to him. So this just sort of hammer home, that sort of state of things here. And, it'll, improve over time. But yeah, I think it's good for him to sort of get to this point.
Yeah, like that's the core takeaway from this. If you're killed in the Avatar state, the cycle is broken. There is your reasoning behind why, even when Aang learns the Avatar state to control it, like why you still can't just like battering ram Aang in the Avatar state at the enemy, because if he catches a stray attack and is killed, the Avatar and sort of all hope is lost in that situation. It has to be a controlled use of it in specific kind of moments to use it effectively, which is ultimately like that's why like even fully realized avatars, they only use it in like bursts. They never stay in it really for more than like a couple of seconds to charge up an attack. And it's only the really extreme situations where we have full on like can stay in the avatar state action. But yeah, the ending of this is obviously Aang has completely devastated this base. Fong still wants to go ahead with the plan. He's like, oh, we can learn to control it. And Sokka just knocks him out and is like to all the other soldiers, like, you okay with that? Yeah, okay, we're off to Amashu. Because the next part of the plan is that Bumi obviously is the natural earthbending teacher for Aang. So we're heading to Amashu next. So makes complete sense. But what are your thoughts on the ending of the episode?
Yeah, I think, Fong is definitely sort of out of his breath here. He really doesn't sort of grasp the situation here. But yeah, no, they've come to the conclusion that it's not working the way that they had intended at this point, and they all can sort of see that. So no, I think Sokka definitely goes the right route here about sort of just taking control of the situation, and then just sort of understanding that maybe they don't need as much support from this sort of random outpost as they originally thought they did.
Mm-hmm. And so that is our Avatar episode for this week. We'll move on to our core episode. Again, it's just one, and that is K202, The Southern Lights. So we're still in like early book 2 of Korra. And for me, this is probably my favorite early book 2 episode, like prior to like beginnings. I think this is a really strong episode that is probably the one that connects the strongest with the end of the book stuff. You get some exact quotes, what Korra does in this episode with the portal, the learnings that she has here. This is what really feels like a kind of bookmark with like the finale 214. I think there's some really, really strong stuff here. And then even on the other sides of the episode, like I like that this is the one that kind of puts Jinora a little bit more into the spotlight with her kind of mysterious setup here. But it's also like a Tonraq focused episode, and we get some nice backstory. I think this episode has like a little bit of everything. It's got some good lore. It continues on the kind of more intricate dynamics of like Unalaq's manipulations and Korra and the kind of awkward situation she finds herself in with, like Unalaq is the one giving her the respect, but the people who really care about her are not really giving Korra the respect, and it's this very interesting, complex situation that everyone finds themselves in. So I'm a huge fan of this episode, and I think I always have been. This is I think a very forgotten episode in the fandom, given the way the fandom views book 2 and especially early book 2. This is one of those episodes where it feels like, yeah, people need to rewatch this one quite heavily because there's so much depth in this one. But what are your overall thoughts on the Southern Lights?
Yeah, I would agree. I think there are, whenever you get a chance to sort of go back to these episodes, you realize that some of them do have more sort of story and history and just sort of things going on with them that really do play into the later parts of the season, and even just the show overall. Just the whole idea of dealing with the spirit portals and understanding how they sort of interact with the world is really sort of explained here and is used towards Unalaq's benefit in this one specifically, and that really sort of push a thing forward in terms of where Korra eventually goes on her sort of like spiritual journey. This really sort of idea of what sort of has happened in the past. It even links, sort of just, they even get sort of mentions of the war overall and how that's affected the South here and how, things sort of trace back over history, like just from what we've seen in the previous season of Avatar here. So no, I think this one definitely has a good bit going for it that you definitely, like you said, you can sort of overlook it, especially if, this season in particular isn't one that stands out to you.
So I guess we'll start on the air temple kind of side of the episode because it's the smaller section. So there's a bunch of smaller kind of plot points that end up happening here because you're setting up a lot of different kind of dynamics. So we get Milo finding a lemur and he calls him Pokey, and we'll come back to that in a few episodes time. But this is also where we get the start of the kind of Tenzin and his own siblings plot, where when they arrive at the Southern Air Temple, Tenzin and his direct family, the kind of air-related part of the family, is treated like royalty basically arriving here. They're celebrities to the air acolytes who run the Southern Air Temple. But we see that Kaya and Bumi, at least by some of the air acolytes, are not really known about, and they're not treated in the same way. And this begins to set up this idea for Kaya and Bumi that the family reunion here is kind of bringing up some of the kind of not so great memories from their childhood, and this is a setup ahead of the two-parter, the family-focused two-parter coming up after this. But like I said, it's a lot of smaller setup stuff, and then the rest of it is more or less summed up by the Jinora setup, where we see Tenzin shows the other kids, but mainly Jinora, the Hall of Statues in the Southern Air Temple, and Jinora connects with the statue of Aang, but is then drawn for some reason to an older statue on the other side of the room. And then when Korra makes the big spiritual kind of awakening with the spirit portal, Jinora is there already and witnesses that statue glow as Korra brings back the Southern Lights and opens the spirit portal. So really good stuff here. This is obviously it's not the focus by any means in this episode, but a lot of smaller scenes to just set the tone ahead of the next couple on what we're doing on that side of the episode. Straight away, we're going to be dealing with a lot of family issues here. But what are your thoughts on the Southern Air Temple stuff?
Yeah, I think it does a good job of really, I guess, sort of setting the stage for Tenzin and what him and his family is going to have to go through, in the next couple episodes. And just overall, it gives you, I guess, sort of idea that there are, dynamics, in their own family that, aren't necessarily perfect, that do have to be sort of worked out, which is, a really good sort of contrast to what we see on the other side of this episode as well. So I think, even if it is the shorter side of things, it does a good job of sort of complementing sort of the bigger sort of family history story that we do get in this episode. And, that's a nice sort of way to go back and forth and have, two separate stories that, are doing sort of their own thing, but, overall we know that it's all sort of, going to be integrated and related to each other in some sort of way. So I think it's a good way to get to see sort of, Tenzin and his families and sort of, I guess sort of you get a little bit of an idea of just sort of the world view on sort of airbenders, or at least, people who are really sort of into the airbenders and sort of what they can bring to the world. You get that sort of perspective here, which I don't think we sort of quite got before. But we do know that, family in general, from what we've seen so far, is going to be important. And this is sort of the starting point of that.
And this is why it was important for Korra in episode 1 of this book to make a clear separation between her and her mentors, kind of in a way reject Tenzin and realize that Korra needs to grow to kind of better see the type of mentor that Tenzin is to her, but Tenzin also needs to grow himself to be a better mentor to Korra. So it's this separation needs to happen here in the same way that the separation from her father needs to happen in this episode so she can grow in the way that she needs. And you see that because we're going to have episodes where it's Tenzin focusing on Milo here, on Ikki in this episode, and then eventually we'll get to the Tenzin Jinora one, which is the really important one with his own children. But we're also, he was reluctant to bring Kaya and Bumi with him, And so far, they haven't really interacted with each other much. They were a little bit forgotten. You can see what they're trying to do here. While on the other side of things, getting into the Korra side of the episode, we once again heavily get into the idea of there is a major issue between these two brothers. Unalaq and Tonraq do have issues with each other. And it's that sense of like Korra is like in the middle of all of this, and especially Tonraq is letting his issues with his brother get in the way of how he's kind of handling like being a mentor to Korra. And that's a big part of this episode. So a lot of this is great. Like the first scene with Korra, like her arriving early for her training with Unalaq is a nice thing to see, that she's eager to learn from someone who actually knows what they're doing with spirit. Now, admittedly, she says she wants to learn spirit fighting, and Unalaq has to clarify that, like, not fighting spirits. I will teach you to be more spiritual and like understand it so you can make the changes in the right way. So he makes sure to clarify that, because even though Unalaq is ultimately manipulating her here, he has to actually teach her to be spiritual. So his advice here has to be truthful and real, because she is starting from a pretty low point. But they straight away get across the idea they're heading for the South Pole, basically. That's where it's all going to go down, because we're heading for the Southern Spirit Portal. So what are your thoughts on the start of this arc here, with Korra starting her training with Unalaq?
Yeah, I think, it's, the launch pad for, Korra and her spiritual journey, and sort of her understanding of what, I guess sort of the spiritual side of being an avatar really entails, or, what it eventually she'll understand it to sort of entail. Because, like you said, Unalaq is sort of manipulating her, but he is, teaching her sort of the finer, I guess sort of core ideas of what they're actually going to do, which, Korra still doesn't have, sort of the I guess sort of correct sort of mindset for how to deal with those. Like even when she does sort of, get, sort of the idea that, okay, we're not doing fighting per se, but we're still going on sort of like a cool adventure. So that's sort of like her sort of, focus on this sort of journey. But, throughout the course of this, eventually she does sort of get a little bit more idea and clarity on that. But yeah, this is really sort of like the initial idea of, Korra just wants to do the cool thing that has to involve with spirit, so that, she can hopefully help people in the long run.
But we do see that Tonraq arrives, and he just decides, I'm going to, like, he doesn't trust Unalaq, so he's going to go with them as well to sort of supervise and protect Korra. And of course, Korra is annoyed by this because of like what happened in the previous episode, the reveals that came out. And already Unalaq begins to sort of like insert some more information into this to kind of put the wedge between them of like, he will be a hindrance. He is misguided, and basically he is at least in part responsible for the South being so out of balance spiritually. And Korra is like, what? Like, what did he do? And Tonraq, like, almost like ignoring Korra is almost like to Unalaq, it doesn't matter what happened in the past. And you can sort of see the problem here, that Unalaq is bringing up the issues of Tonraq to get, in between them. But Tonraq is not helping things by not telling Korra stuff, and basically like not helping his relationship with Korra because he dislikes his brother. He's letting that get in the way of like how he kind of affects Korra. And I like the complex dynamics at play here, that Unalaq is playing this much better than Tonraq is, and we see what ends up happening here. But what are your thoughts on the dynamic between like the brothers here, Tonraq and Korra, as we set out on the mission?
Yeah, you can definitely see sort of the manipulation at play, and sort of the understanding the situation, and how Tonraq is really just sort of, he just sort of sees sort of like the danger, and, understands sort of like what's out there, where, Korra doesn't quite sort of see that. She's not really aware of that. And, she just sees this as sort of like a hindrance on her sort of journey here. Now, of course, eventually she does allow him to go, but it definitely, you can see that I think, it's pretty clear to pretty much everyone that there's something going on between these two brothers. And, Korra thinks she knows what it is, but she really doesn't know at this point. But it's something that eventually will come out.
Well, what is so interesting about this is that, like, Tonraq is only going on this because he wants to, like, protect Korra from the spiritual stuff, basically. And it is this kind of fundamental misunderstanding of, like, she is the Avatar. She's meant to be involved in this stuff. Like, I get you don't trust your brother, but she's meant to know this stuff. And, like, it is a case where, like, he is coming with them to get in the way, and that's Korra's issue. And she's okay to feel aggrieved, especially because of, we'll get to what he says later on, some of the stuff Tonraq says. We get an explanation for, basically, in my mind, this is why the spirit portal, at least the southern one, never gets mentioned in Avatar. There is a thing called the Everstorm in the South Pole that has been ongoing effectively since, I guess, pretty early on at the start of the 100-Year War. That because the South was so decimated, spirituality has been lost, and so there's this sort of almost like spiritually induced storm always around the South Pole, and thus the sealed southern spirit portal. And here's your reasoning behind, like, why didn't Aang just unlock the portal? One, he didn't know about it. Two, there was a giant storm in the way, and they never knew that was a way to get to the north very, very easy. So, Everstorm is a nice reference to get here. And I think we get quickly introduced to the idea that Bolin, Eska, Desna, and Mako are also coming along with us on this journey as well. So, the next big thing is actually that Unalaq explains the idea that, like, I want you to unlock the southern spirit portal. It's been locked for a very, very long time. And he goes over, like, lots of very interesting stuff here that, like, the reason the Glacier Spirits Festival, like, ends on this day is because it's the solstice. You need the spiritual kind of power of the solstice when spirituality is at its highest. This is what you need to be able to do this when the South is so lacking in spirituality. And again, we have another bit of a clarification, the lesson here. Korra's like, oh, like, why are evil spirits attacking? And Unalaq says, there are no evil spirits. There is light and dark in them all. But when they're unbalanced, the darkness takes over. Which I find to be a fascinating statement about spirits coming from him. And it feels like there's a lot of truth from that. That's one where it doesn't feel like I'd be at all questioning, like, what is or isn't there in that, because he's ultimately the villain. That's an interesting one, just full stop. But what are your thoughts on some of these reveals and that, like, the debut of, like, their spirit portals and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because it almost comes off almost sort of like nonchalant that, this stuff is here, that there's an Everstorm, there's a spirit portal, the spirits are around, this is sort of how the spirits work, and, like, there's sort of, base level idea and how, you can, potentially interact with them and sort of, deal with them in different situations here. But, it's all really sort of, like, important to the world and sort of the understanding of things and how things are going to work, going forward. Like you said, it does seem like this is probably, like, Unalaq, even if he is sort of the end all villain of things, he does have a really good sort of understanding of spirits and how they work and how you interact with them, which is, just makes it even more so. He's just such a good manipulator in this situation because he's able to sort of blend the truth in with the lies in order to get sort of what he really wants from the situation going forward. But it really does. I think it starts to open Korra's eyes to what is really going on with these sort of, beings, and how, she might actually angle to sort of help things in the situation going forward.
And that's the thing in all of this, is that, like, he is manipulating her to open the spirit portals because he wants Vaatu to be freed when harmonic convergence arrives. But that aside, this does have a positive effect on the South in that, like, it gets rid of this, like, kind of spiritual, like, forever storm, the Everstorm. It brings the kind of legendary Southern Lights back, and is a major step forward for Korra, like what she accomplishes here, of actually, like, proving to herself that she can do something like this as the Avatar. And it gets into the bigger picture at the end, which she doesn't realize yet, which is the idea of, okay, these spirits portals were closed in the past, but they initially existed in a state where they were open. That does it not suggest that they're meant to be open for a reason? That balance between spirits and humans is nowhere right now. Opening them is potentially a good thing to do. So Korra at the moment, you would say, doesn't particularly have an opinion on any of this stuff because she doesn't understand it yet. She's just being told to do this. But this is the first step to her beginning to understand. And I do want to have a little bit of an in-depth discussion on the whole, there's light and dark in them all, but when they're unbalanced, the darkness takes over. Because I know a lot of people have issues with the fact that, like, what is balance in Avatar when it comes to this sort of light and dark dynamic? And it plays into a lot of different franchises, like even Star Wars and stuff like that, of like, when you have light and dark, what should be balance? Should it be 50-50? Is gray balance? Or the Avatar approach here is that balance is actually when you don't have much darkness. So the idea is that you still have a sliver of sort of like dark or chaos, but that's to allow a certain like amount of like freedom almost. So with the spirits, when they're in a balanced state, they're in their light spirit form. That's their normal form. When they're unbalanced is when they're in their dark form. So it is suggesting straight away that, the world existing in an era of chaos is an inherently unbalanced thing. The world existing in an era of peace is a balance. And I get it, some people might dislike that, but I don't really have an issue with that being the way Avatar approaches doing balance, because I think you can criticize the kind of gray approach just as much, especially when chaos like always seeks to sort of like corrupt. So allowing it to be 50-50 seems like a bad move given what it is. And especially when the peace side of things doesn't seek to become like order. It's peace, not order. Whereas maybe if you removed all aspects of dark, then suddenly peace and balance becomes like order and control. But that's not the lens that we're going to. So what are your opinions on kind of that whole light-dark dynamic in Avatar, and what should or should not balance be?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think, because you can go many different ways with that. And I don't know, I think the idea that there is some sort of, negative or chaos or however you want to say it, within your being or your spirit in order to sort of have sort of a more, I guess, sort of positive or, light side approach to things. It works within what they've generally have been, I guess, sort of expressing to us, from this series and the previous one, that, nothing is ever sort of like 100% or, in the middle of the road. Like, things can go either way depending on the situation. So the idea that, it's not going to always be sort of, perfect in the route. I think that sort of goes with me, at least with the sort of ethos that they've been trying to sort of hammer home with this, and sort of, show that there is just sort of a bit of, I guess, sort of, difference that can happen along the route here. But I think, they're trying to sort of show that, they're not perfect, that, nothing's ever going to be in 100% or, in the middle of the road, which I think, works for me with how they're trying to explain things.
Yeah, and to me it matches up with like what we've always had described to us as like what the Avatar like tries to do, like what Wan and Rava tried to do together, and especially like stuff like say Yang Chen in Escape from the Spirit World, her answers about like why is the Avatar human, and like the need to understand what like humanity is, the willingness to make mistakes, is that like an era of light and balance allows for like enough freedom that people can make their own like choices, and that includes making mistakes, and that includes like basically people becoming villains, because you leave the freedom for that little bit of chaos to actually create something that is bad, and that it's not so much control that never happens. Whereas the reverse, an era of chaos, you feel, doesn't leave room for the little bit of like peace and balance. And I think that's sort of like the difference in all of this. Um, but people are obviously going to disagree on it. But it's not a continuity error here. It's not like a lore error. This is just a clarification of the way we're doing things ultimately. So then we get to the kind of core issue of like, yeah, why are there suddenly like all these sort of like dark spirits attacks and stuff like that? And Unalaq explains that it's because Tonraq is here, and he basically prompts Korra with the idea of like, have you ever wondered like why your father, who's technically from the Northern Water Tribe, isn't basically the chief of the North? Why does he never visit the North? It's because of what happened here. Like, explain it to her. And Tonraq is forced to admit that what happened is that he was banished. He came to the South because he was banished from the North, because he almost like destroyed the tribe. He almost brought ruin to the Northern Water Tribe because of his lack of spirituality. Now, admittedly, later on it's revealed to be sort of manipulated by Unalaq, but Tonraq's sort of like not caring for the spirits approach was still a thing in all of this. So like, it's not just completely the purpose defeated because Unalaq was behind it all. He played on an actual aspect of Tonraq's like character in this, which is important to kind of bring up. So the backstory is from 20 years ago, when he was a general in the Northern Water Tribe. Barbarians attacked. Tonraq drove them into the tundra, and specifically the forest surrounding the northern spirit portal. Tonraq attacked, even though, I guess he was warned to potentially avoid attacking, because if you damage the spirit forest, basically the sacred forest, you could affect the spirits there. And of course he did that. This prompted a counterattack from the spirits, who are now dark. Tonraq is unable to stop them himself. Unalaq knows how to stop spirits. He saved the day. Tonraq was seen to have nearly destroyed the tribe. His father banished him. That's how he came to the South. And this explains how Unalaq, despite being like the younger brother, became the chief of the North, and I guess technically the South as well. And I think this is a really, really strong backstory that, the takeaway with regards to like what we're dealing with at the moment being that Tonraq has shown a lack of care for spirit-related stuff, which is what he's doing over the course of this trip and what he did in the past. And he's just continuing with that here. That his like perspective on things is that doing something in relation to the spirits got me into trouble and affected my life. So you also shouldn't do that stuff, even though you're the Avatar and kind of have to do that stuff. And even Korra saying that, like, I'm the Avatar, I meant to do this stuff, still doesn't get through to him. And I think that's the core problem here. But what are your thoughts on the Tonraq backstory here?
Yeah, I thought this was really cool to sort of get this. I mean, I think getting to see our father of our main character sort of in the past, sort of what they were up to, how, they were in this unfortunate situation, and how that sort of, shaped his whole sort of character going forward, and, how Korra didn't know anything about this. And, it's unfortunate that it had to sort of come out at this point in time, because it doesn't benefit at all at what they're going for. And, this is like a perfectly experted play by Unalaq in terms of like, just getting the situation in the right way that he wants it for going forward, that sort of pushes Korra towards him. But the story itself, it definitely it just sort of explains sort of how you can go really wrong with the spirits, and how everything isn't necessarily sort of there's more of a more understanding there that needs to go about it. And Tonraq, especially back then and even now, so just really now he's just wary of it. Before he wasn't wary enough of it. So there's like two extremes there, right? And he's still figuring it all out, which I think eventually he does sort of get some better grasp on it by the end of everything. But it definitely like many of our characters here, they're still learning to deal with the spiritualness of the world. And the southern area it's been lacking, which is the whole play that Unlock's trying to get at here. So I think it's definitely expert manipulation, but it's also just a good sort of history and story dump that we get
Hmm.
as well.
So like this is like the second major like reveal about her father that she's got here. Like one, he lied to her about like why the whole compound Avatar compound thing happened, saying that it was Aang when it was actually him and Tenzin.
Hmm.
Now this major part of her father's like backstory that she never knew about has just come out. That explains quite a bit, and the confrontation here after this is quite good because Tonraq says it was to protect you. That's why I never told you. And Korra, I think rightfully so, is just kind of like, why do you keep doing this? Why do you keep like saying you're protecting me by hiding things from me? Because that's her core like issue in all of this is that like she's the Avatar. She's meant to have a knowledge of some of this stuff, spiritual, political, and so on. And both Tonraq and Tenzin are both sort of like doing this by just not telling her about things. Yes, it's because they care and want to protect her, but it's also like they're kind of actively almost getting in the way of her being the Avatar, which is what she wants to be, as we'll get to in later scenes and in future episodes. Tonraq even says, like, I should never have gone into that forest, and we shouldn't be going to the South Pole now. Spirits and the physical world should remain separate. And given that, like, Unalaq's approach is, like, literally the exact opposite of that. He believes they should be back together. This is the extremes of this situation. That Tonraq is actively telling Korra to not be the bridge between worlds by saying that like you're the person who's meant to almost like bring them together and deal with the union of these two. No, they should forever be separate. And it all is because of this incident in the past. And sure, he wants to protect Korra, but not like this, given that she's the Avatar. And there's just he's not fully seeing the full deal with Korra here. Um, and this is really, really important. Like she even brings up, I'm meant to be the bridge between worlds. This is where Unalaq explains about the Southern Lights and how the loss of spirituality over the years. And I think this is where the mention of the 100-Year War gets brought up, is that like it's the continuous loss of like how decimated the South has been since the war began that has led to both the Everstorm kind of happening, but also, that's why the lights have gone away. And basically, you can bring them back by doing this spiritual thing. What are your thoughts on this kind of conversation that is had afterwards, after the backstory?
Yeah, I mean, it does sort of play into the idea that this is why they're so out of whack, how they're, so out of sort of balance here. Like it's just, it's too much chaos in the South, at least from the perspectives that Unalaq's going for them to really have any sort of balance here. And, that sort of, the history of the 100-Year War and maybe just Tonraq himself being in the area is unfortunately sort of, pushing things towards this direction now. Is it just because Tonraq is there that, things are seemingly as bad as they are? I don't know. Maybe it is. But that's definitely the angle that he's going for here. And with everything that we've seen so far, it feels like this is like lining up, right? So it's like, what else are you meant to believe at this point in time?
Yeah, like that is an interesting thing in all of this, is that like my assumption is that like I think there probably is a lack of balance in the South spiritually. That probably means there are some dark spirits, but I 100% believe like most of the attacks are like Unalaq or orchestrating them, basically. That we know later on he can basically control them, like the dark spirits follow him effectively. So I think that's why the rebel spirit in the first episode attacks. I think it is roughly why the attack happens here, because he's always prepared to spirit bend to get them out of the situation, because he's the only one who knows that technique. But it's clever because it keeps bringing up the idea of like, I'm irreplaceable in this situation because I can do this thing that none of you know how to deal with spirits. I can deal with, and that's the kind of key to all of this. So yeah. So at this point in the episode, the dark spirit attack does come in, big fight. Korra actually tries to spirit bend in the middle of this, and she nearly gets it, but it kind of breaks out. So she hasn't, become spiritual enough to do it, but she immediately grasped it despite not really being like directly thought it. So I think she takes from that a bit like, okay, it's something that can happen. And immediately after this, once their spirit bent away, Tonraq is immediately like, see, this is why we have to leave. We're going to leave right now. He makes the decision for everyone. But she's kind of had enough of her father at this point. It's like, nope, you leave. And he does. He accepts this. He does leave. And it leaves like a very frustrated Korra. And I get to a certain extent why people get sort of a little bit annoyed with Korra in early book 2. But I think there's enough setup and build up to where you completely get why she's in this situation. Is that like, she already told him at the start, like, I don't really need you to come. And him actually going with them has just sort of caused more kind of issues than kind of otherwise. And so I completely understand Korra's frustration here. And I do think some of the fandom don't try to understand it either. Like, I rarely see people in these early episodes talk about, like, Tonraq's actions, Tenzin's actions. It's all, I'm annoyed at Korra being annoyed, basically, that sort of stuff. But you get it here, and we'll get to it, but like, she apologizes to, like, say, Mako for some of her behavior here, but he gets it, I think, is the kind of point in all of this. But what are your thoughts here on, like, sort of Korra kind of in this moment here, telling her father to leave, and kind of the kind of frustration that she faces after this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is sort of like a buildup of things at this point, because she's been manipulated, she's been left out of things, she hasn't been sort of in the know of what's going on, and at this point here, she's really focused on achieving what she's set out to do, and her father at this point is really sort of just getting in the way of things, and it does at some point it does seem maybe a little bit sort of annoying in terms of just everything that's going on, but that's really that's on point for what the character herself is feeling at this moment in time. So I think it aligns with everything that we're sort of seeing here. So I think, in that regard, it works pretty well. And, she does, learn or understand that, maybe she put things a little bit too far, and, eventually her character overall sort of evens out in terms of that. But I think it's definitely, one of those sort of situational moments where she really, she's so close, Unalaq says the same thing, that we're so close to this sort of, next step in her sort of journey as an avatar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's the point in all of this, is that, like, all of these characters need to grow. Korra needs to grow, Tonraq needs to grow, Tenzin needs to grow, which is what happens. Like, we'll see with Tonraq, even just in this episode, and then what they do in, like, basically like the next 2-3 episodes. They do stuff with all of these characters that is like, it's not just about these annoying drama focused moments. We build to the point where, like, ultimately Tenzin realizes he was not the best mentor to Korra. Tonraq realizes he was wrong to hold her back. And Korra does grow over the course of this book through learning what she learns in beginnings and how she is like after that, and then going into the finale, and it all plays together. But I think the next scene is really important, because we're basically at the position, like we're at the entrance effectively to where the portal is. Korra has to go in alone, and she doubts herself. She's like just straight up to like, Unalaq, really? Like, I have to go in alone? Like, I don't believe I can do this, because like I'm not spiritual. I don't have any power to make this happen. And he just says, like, you can do it. And she's stunned in this moment, because and the dialogue is actually really good here. Korra says, I guess I'm just so used to people telling me how to do things that I forgot what it was like to have someone trust. And Unalaq does believe in her, and he says, Korra, all the past avatars live on inside you. Let them guide you. Let them help you find the light in the dark. And this inspires her enough to where she is able to actually succeed when she goes in there. And, there's fights issues along the way. She nearly gets captured by spirits a few times. But it's such an important scene in terms of like just Korra and the way she feels at the start of book 2 is that she really doesn't feel like the important people around her do trust her in some of these key situations. And that's evidenced by the fact that Tenzin and Tonraq didn't tell her about the spirit attacks and always kept trying to like speak for her in all of those scenes. So, you know, Unalaq playing the role of respecting the Avatar and believing and trusting her was everything that she actually did. And it's kind of showing that like this is where both Tonraq and Tenzin needed to kind of grow and just like give her a little bit more respect and trust. They can still protect her, but not as much as they kind of were doing and the way they were doing it. And again, it's an interesting one because it's a very memorable scene, but it is still ultimately like Unalaq manipulating her. But I find it's an interesting bookmark with the finale because the finale is called Light in the Dark. And ultimately, a lot of the stuff that happens here, Korra kind of like utilizes later on to basically like defeat Unalaq, like defeated with his own technique that she tried to use here. The person who believed in her, like this is her first big step as the Avatar doing something spiritual. It's almost like through him acting in this way, you see like who Unalaq was before Vaatu, before like maybe the Red Lotus, that this is the actual truly spiritual, one of the best spiritual characters in the show, and you almost wish that he could have stayed like this, and what a difference to the world it would have been if he wasn't so influenced to be Red Lotus and Vaatu and so on. But what are your thoughts on this important scene just before Korra goes in to find the portal?
Yeah, this is I don't know, I think like you said, it's a good one. It really shows sort of, you know, Korra becoming more of like a character that she can be in the future, where she really has, you know, the confidence in pretty much everything, not just sort of like her bending prowess, but just sort of, you know, her way of, you know, supporting the world and helping and leading the world through her sort of avatarhood, and how she can really sort of, you know, not necessarily like, you know exactly what to do, but, you know, can have faith that she's doing things in the right way, or, you know, using what she's learned, or, you know, using her connection, you know, with everything that she's done so far in order to sort of, you know, just make a positive impact on the world. So I think this is really, it's a good, you know, beginning point for her to sort of trust in herself, and seeing, you know, sort of, you know, a mentor that she thinks is sort of, you know, leading her along the right way.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, so she goes in. There is actually some pretty cool action here. I know, like there's still people who like complain that like, ooh, 7 episodes of Korra are like animated by a different company, but like some of this stuff is very nice. Like when Korra does the like fire punch inside the spirit, that's nicely animated. The follow-up sort of like crazy airbending breakdance move she does is also quite nice. And it builds up to like she's at the portal, she doesn't know what to do. The spirits are latching onto her, so she kind of last ditch uses the Avatar state to sort of force her way, touches the portal, and this is what eventually like opens it and unlocks it. And you know, the beam of light shoots up, the Everstorm clears, the Southern Lights are seen for the first time in who knows how long, and the epic shot as she walks out as this crazy stuff is happening in the sky and in the background. And it's just the progress in a way that like she did that. She made that return because of her power, truly doing something spiritual for the first time, and in a way, someone believing and trusting in her. And again, it's so interesting again that it is ultimately manipulation, but that's what makes the end decision to stick with it being open so impactful, is that yes, she was maybe didn't know the full situation when she opens it here, but when she does know the full situation, she's just like, do you know what? I think this is actually probably the right choice, and I'm ready to tackle the issue that this sort of presents going forward. And that is, maybe the spirits and humans need to interact a bit more. Maybe Unalaq's right about there being problems in the world with the lack of spirituality. Maybe we should think about this a little bit. Obviously, Unalaq begins to, present more and more of his kind of evil scheme as we go forward, the darker aspect of his plan. But the core ideas here and some of his kind of fears about the world are pretty valid, I think you have to say. So yeah, and it's at this point that you see Tonraq on his way back home, looks up in the sky, sees what's happened, and it's just like, she did it. And he kind of realizes that, like, if she had listened to me, if I had stuck around, if I had been acting the way I've been acting this entire time, I might have prevented this from happening. And it's just this moment of like him realizing that this is a good thing that this is back and that she was able to do this. And we'll get more of them actually talking to each other in the coming episodes, but just it's already, you see that like, I was kind of wrong type situation. So all pretty good stuff. But what are your thoughts on this moment here, the unlocking of the portal and the immediate aftermath?
Yeah, no, I think like you said earlier, the unlocking the portal is a really good scene. Like, the way that they sort of show the struggle, the sort of, anxiety that she has with this, how, almost defeat and, the eventual unlocking of it, I think it's really cool. It does a really good job of showing that. And I think that's one of the cooler parts of this, sort of season in terms of seeing that sort of sequence there. But yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, it's nice to see the resolution here. It's nice to see how it's, unveiled, how it's really is sort of impactful on the area and splitting the clouds. And definitely does feel like sort of a lot of people have come to sort of realize a lot by actually seeing this. Like, you get to see all the characters sort of like reaction towards this sort of final reveal, and how that times up with everything that's also happened with like the Tenzin side that we spoke about earlier. Is a really good sort of, I guess, sort of ending part of this episode.
Yeah, like even this like Bolin and Mako having just like this amazed reaction to what they've just seen, that like for them, like, this is some of their first like spiritual encounters. Even though they believed in Korra, they're like, that's quite an effect to happen just by Korra doing something. That's all like really, really good to just highlight that, yeah, like she did this, she accomplished this. This is where Korra does apologize to Mako for her behavior. But again, he understands it. Doesn't have too much of an issue here. And then we get the final scene of like, they head back as well. And as they arrive back at the, like basically Wolf Cove, they see the Northern Fleet is arriving. So Unalaq's troops are arriving at the south. And they're coming in, and Unalaq's just like, well, yeah, this is happening because this is the next step in like uniting the tribes and bringing them together. And for the first time with Unalaq, this is where you see Korra having the doubts of like, the help with the spiritual stuff was fantastic, but this is something different. What's going on here? She doesn't know if she can necessarily support this. And this is where some of the complexities begin to come in here, and a lot of the bigger issues begin to happen. But this is also like the first stage in Unalaq going a bit overboard, I think, here. Like, the portal being unlocked is helpful to the south in a certain way, but now he's coming in, forcibly changed his spirituality. But I think the reality here is that this is just a case of kind of logistics. His troops are going to secure the Southern Spirit Portal ahead of his ultimate plan, which I think is a point that a lot of people miss with this, when they want like this whole book should have been about the North versus South conflict, when the North versus South conflict that we get here is purely like basically a minor subplot to just protect the two portals, basically. Like, I don't think this era is the era to really go in depth on the North versus South issue. Yes, this is what ultimately results in the independence of the South, but this is fundamentally like a kind of a feud between brothers and Unalaq just doing his plan. I take like very little from Unalaq in terms of his view on the politics of the South versus the North. Outside of that, he views the South as being not particularly spiritual. I think, him just having the power as the chief is about the most of the politics that we actually get here. Yes, on the Southern side, like, they feel it's fighting for their independence, But on the Unalaq side of things, I think there's very little like politics focus on his behalf ultimately. But what are your thoughts on this kind of surprising ending to this?
Yeah, no, that's a good point there. Is that like I don't know, it's because of his sort of character is he's so above the politics and the like minor minutia of the two sort of tribes, because he's just solely focused on his end goal that he doesn't even see the sort of conflict that they have between the two of them, other than the fact that it's a means to the end of what he's trying to do. It's an interesting point, and it makes you wonder what would have been, how it might have gone if that was really his actual focus here, and it's not just about him, securing the spirit portals so that he can, release Vaatu and take over the world or whatever. But yeah, it's definitely, I don't know. I don't think it's something that you particularly, I mean, I don't know. They key you into his sort of, overall idea of, he doesn't like the South. He doesn't like where they're going, which leads you to think it's the whole sort of like, nation on or side of the nation on other side of the nation. But, when it really does come down to it, it does seem like he really has his own sort of, goals and ambitions. And he's just trying to push everyone, including the whole nation, towards, what he wants to do, regardless of anything else. So, it definitely does seem like it's something that you might not have expected particularly to happen, or at least in the way that he's going about it.
Yeah, like it is actually a really complicated kind of sequence of plots, because it's the Varric sort of like profiting from like selling weapons basically plot that's the more kind of almost like politically charged plot in all of this, whereas like Unalaq uses little bits and pieces of politics to get his way in terms of like kind of framing Tonraq that I think we get in like the next two episodes, and the whole trial situation. But that's more to get his brother out of the way, who's like an obstacle in his way. But the actual there are core issues between the North and the South is more on like the kind of Southerners kind of side of things rather than the Northerners, because we don't really get too much of that. But I've always said before that if you're going to explore that core issue, I think that's probably a story best told with the kind of origin of the South story, like how that breakaway actually happened is the interesting point. Maybe an era where they're on particularly bad terms with each other, because like most of the time there's no issue. Like they lost touch over the course of the 100-Year War, but things are good in the ATLA era as far as we're aware. And for the most part, things seem fine in the Korra era, outside of the fact that like Unalaq's plan requires like occupation of both spirit portals, and that requires a lot of troops and stuff like that. It's very interesting. Like I understand, I think, where people like jump to the idea of like, instead of the spirit stuff, we should have just focused on the politics between the two nations. But it's almost like that's not exactly the point that we're tackling here. But I think I get where it sort of comes from. But yeah, like this is the point here. Like the end of episode 2 is like the first real time Korra in any way has a doubt or a kind of a true questioning of Unalaq. But even after this, she can't know for sure what way to see him this way. And I do think, again, it's another thing with the fandom with this book. I think a lot of people really take the idea that we knew going in Unalaq was going to be the villain, and just assign that to everything and make it seem like Korra is an idiot for not understanding this, when Unalaq has not revealed himself to be a villain at this point. Even Tonraq doesn't know that Unalaq is the cause of his banishment yet. That's going to happen. And a lot of people, I think, do miss out on a lot of those more nuanced plots in book 2. Because I think it really comes clear that like a lot of Korra fans have only ever watched book 2 once when it aired, and don't know the details particularly well. And a lot of people could do with a rewatch of book 2, because one, it is quite good. Even these earlier episodes that a lot of people dismiss. Now, I think we'll get to like say episode 5 and 6 where we can maybe talk about more of the problems with the book, but I think so far I don't really think there's too much to complain about here. Like the quality and like what we're dealing with here is in general, I think, pretty good after just these first two episodes. Like the only thing is just that like Korra can be a little frustrating. And I think that's about the only real kind of annoying element here, because I think you get a decent amount of humor with like Bolin and the whole Eska and Desna dynamic that doesn't even take up that much time in the episodes. Like we didn't really talk about it too much, which I suppose. Do you have any thoughts on kind of Bolin, Eska, and Desna's involvement here? Just kind of paired up as like a bit of a comedy contrast trio here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It adds, I guess, a little bit of nice sort of contrast to here because a lot of this stuff here is kind of serious. So it's nice to see sort of, I guess, the fun, Bolin being sort of his, typical sort of, funny, not necessarily trying to be funny type of self. So no, I think it works for me. It doesn't annoy me too much because that's just sort of their sort of character and this sort of leads them to where they go eventually.
So yeah, that is K202, the Southern Lights. So for the next podcast, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing 3 episodes again. So that is 1 episode of Avatar. So that will be 202, Cave of Two Lovers. And then on the Korra side of things, we're going to do both of the Civil Wars out of K203 and K204. Civil Wars Part 1 and Civil Wars Part 2 together. So we can finally have the, was Aang a bad father discussion on the podcast. Like it comes up like every single month in the fandom somewhere online, that discussion comes up. So we can finally get into that here as we get like focus on Bumi, Kaya, Jinora, Iki, Milo over the course of these episodes. Like there's some interesting stuff in these ones. But what are your thoughts on that selection of 3 episodes?
Yeah, that should be a good one to go for, and let's see, I guess our thoughts on the whole topic of the family lineage and how that sort of went out on the long run. But no, it's a good one.
So yeah, that has been the podcast for this time. And yeah, we'll hopefully come back in either a couple of weeks. Don't know exactly when. It sort of depends on like when a certain amount of news kind of drops. Like if something bigger happens, like say the Yang Chen book gets revealed, we'll probably do one that very week. But there will be another podcast, and we're planning to do some more episode reviews. So yes, that has been episode 257 of the Avatar Online podcast. It's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye-bye.